Chapter 66. This young lady is disturbing the peace of surroundings. She keeps asking to go in without an identification, the guard said to the lady in red that had just arrived. Please, I need to see her. It's urgent. The more time we spend here, the more dangerous it becomes. Angie shouted out again. The guard turned around to grab Angie again after she shouted that out. Falco, wait. The lady in red commanded. She walked towards them and stood in front of Angie. Who is this person you're referring to? She asked. Maybe I can help you pass the message across, she proposed with a friendly look. She's a teacher here. Her name is Miss Amy. Angie responded to the lady. The guard's eyes slightly widened. She's looking for young miss? The guards were surprised by this revelation. Angie noticed the reactions of everyone around her were a little bizarre, including the lady who was staring at her with a contemplative gaze like she was trying to figure out whether they had met before. Tell me, kiddo, why are you looking for me? Angie heard the female ask her this, and her mouth hung open in surprise. You're Miss Amy? Angie asked. A few minutes later, Angie had finished explaining everything that happened to Miss Amy. Miss Amy's expression was surprisingly looking bright after hearing that. She had a smile hung on her face as she stared at Angie. The guards felt a chill run down their spine when they saw the smile. Everyone knew that she wasn't the type to smile unless something disastrous was about to go down. Angie, that's your name, right? Miss Amy asked. H&M? Angie nodded in affirmation. What are we going to do, miss? She inquired. Not we. Miss Amy answered. Suddenly a chill spread through the air as Miss Amy's smile grew broader, which made Angie look confused. She wondered why Miss Amy would be smiling, but she could undeniably feel the chill spreading across the place. Go home. They'll take care of this, Miss Amy said, and walked forward. The ice-cold tone at which Miss Amy spoke left no room for debate. Although Angie was still worried, she had no choice but to comply. She stared at Miss Amy's back, which was currently getting farther and farther away. Miss Amy, will he be all right? Angie shouted this out subconsciously. Miss Amy paused in front of her hoverbike before tilting her head towards the left to stare at Angie. I don't know, but for the sake of the captives, he better be all right. Miss Amy answered. The amount of bloodlust her words exuded caused the guards along with the people in the vicinity to shiver subconsciously. Miss Amy sat on her bike and started the engine before zooming off. A few minutes later, Miss Amy arrived in front of a well-secured and barricaded area. This place seemed to be swarming with different kinds of security operatives that moved around the vicinity. Most of them were laced in armor-like uniforms. The space within the walls that barricaded this environment was as wide as a small city. The tallest building in Plankton City happened to be located inside this well-guarded stronghold. Miss Amy stared at the rocket-shaped building up ahead that happened to be so tall that its top couldn't be seen. She sighed in dissatisfaction before moving towards the entrance of the stronghold, where tons of guards clad in intimidating-looking sci-fi-like armors could be seen. Inside the dark room where Gustav was kept captive, Eden stood in front of Gustav, who had just finished speaking. Is that all? He asked. Yes, that was everything that happened during the time I was within that forest. Gustav's eyes still had a listless look as he spoke. Now we know everything that happened, Eden said with a low tone. Miss Amy stood in front of a large room filled with holographic computers and a multitude of technological pieces of equipment. A group of people in orange uniforms could be seen moving from place to place within this room. Some were handling the computer devices which showed the state of different places in the planet. Beside Miss Amy was a man clad in dark orange uniform with black stripes. He sported light green hair and was pretty short in height, around 45 in height. To what do I owe this visit? Amy, he said with a playful tone while chuckling. I don't have time to mess around. I need you to use the Orion satellite to track someone for me, Miss Amy stated without extending any greetings. So sharp, so straight to the point. But seeing your urgent looks, ha ha ha, I have to use this to my advantage and make a deal with you first. The man smiled sheepishly as he spoke. Miss Amy kept glared daggers at him before answering. Fine. It's time to get this kid back before that woman figures out anything. Well, decide what to do next after giving young Master Young feedback about his narrative, Eden said while pulling off the helmet from Gustav's head. Canfer, Take him back to his apartment, Eden called out to the other man. The man nodded and started unhooking the metallic holds strapping Gustav to the chair. After he completed that, he tapped Gustav. "Get up, kid," he demanded, but there was no answer. "Hey kid, get up," he called out again, but there was no response once again. The man stared at Gustav's face in confusion and noticed that his eyes were the same as before. Listless. "Boss Eden, I think this one is gone," Kenfer said while raising his hand and placing it in front of Gustav's face. He waved his hand repeatedly, looking for signs that Gustav had regained his normal consciousness, but there was no reaction whatsoever. He grabbed Gustav's arm, raised it, and dropped it. The arm dropped back towards Gustav's side like he was dead. "He's underage, so it's normal for this to happen. Just get him out of here," Eden said with a slightly annoyed tone. The man nodded and lifted Gustav upon his right shoulder before walking out the exit. Inside the technology room, Miss Amy was still speaking to the short man. "Accepted. Just find him for me," Miss Amy said to the man who showed a shocked expression on his face. "You accepted without even listening to my demand first?" The man said that with a dumbfounded look. "What if I make unreasonable demands?" he questioned. "Do not waste my time. Zach, find him for me, or do you wish to die?" Miss Amy's face darkened as she threatened him. Chapter 67. The smile on the man's face disappeared as he noticed her glare. "Ahem, give me his life signs," Zach demanded. "His life signs." Before Miss Amy could complete her statement, she heard a ring. Trang, trang, trang. Miss Amy took a small button from her sleeves area and placed it on the left side of her head. Miss Amy's eyes slightly widened in astonishment as a masculine voice drifted into her mind. "Gustav? Are you all right?" she voiced out with a worried tone. "Good. Where are you?" she replied with a tone of relief. Zach watched from the side with a confused look. He could already guess that she was communicating with the person she came to search for, which had him wondering what exactly happened in the first place. "All right, I'm coming," Miss Amy said, and removed the button from the side of her head before turning around. "The deal is off, Zach," she said, and walked out of the room. Zach stared at her back and sighed. "So much for getting my hopes up. I thought I could finally get her to do something for me." Eden stood at the left corner of the darkroom. He was speaking to someone with a communication button glued to the side of his head. These days, easy communication was possible with the use of these technological buttons. Calls could be answered with a thought, so there was no need to bring out the device. It was mostly used on the battlefield for communication. A person could be fighting battles and receiving instructions at the same time. Also, in this age where bloodline abilities existed, some mixed bloods could listen to people talk from afar, but with this, it would be impossible for someone to eavesdrop on your conversation, since the voice of the person on the other end was going directly into your mind and not your ears. "Yes, young Master Young, we just finished interrogating him using the brain tweak helmet." "Yes." He recounted the whole train of events. "Yes. Yes. I was surprised also. Everything adds up now." "Yes, young Master Young. I will give you the full details once I return." Eden's voice could be heard multiple times. "Should I also inform him about how that kid happened to use a speed that was on par with a serial-ranked mixed blood? According to the information gathered, he's only an F grade. How would he be able to use such power?" Eden wanted to ask Gustav about this, but there was no time for that. "Well, he's now a vegetable. This practically spells the end for him, so I don't think Master Young needs to know," Eden concluded. "All right, young Master Young. I will be leaving the facility in a few." "Understood," he voiced out before the call ended. After the call ended, Eden walked towards the bed-like chair that Gustav was strapped on before. He arrived before it and reached out his hand to grab the helmet when, boom, the wall behind him blasted apart. "Huh." Eden turned around in shock to look behind him, but he saw nothing. He suddenly felt wary. "Who's there?" he shouted out while looking left and right. "Show yourself," he shouted out again as his arm suddenly turned shadowy and he raised it. "I will kill you if you don't reveal yourself before me." He started walking forward slowly with a look of caution while looking left and right severally. Sometimes he would even rotate just to check behind him, but even after doing that for more than 1 minute, he still didn't see anyone. What is going on? There's no way the wall just exploded on its own. He could see the bright corridor from the space within the broken wall up ahead, but he couldn't understand how the wall could explode by itself. It didn't explode by itself. I'm responsible for that. He suddenly heard a cold feminine voice whisper into his left ear, "Who are?" He quickly turned around while speaking only for him to notice a fist headed for his face. Bang! A loud bone-cracking sound rang out upon collision, causing Eden's face to cave in as the fist buried itself 2 inches deep into his face before throwing him backward. Whoosh! The half-green mask on his face broke to pieces, revealing a half-burnt face. Splurt! Part of his face cracked open as blood came spilling out of his face while he was being catapulted backward in midair. He couldn't even scream in pain due to the destruction of his face. Bang! His body slammed into the wall and broke through it. Bang! 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 His body kept crashing through the walls in a straight line until it finally came to a stop, several hundred feet ahead. From within the darkroom, the body-shaped holes within the walls could be seen. Swoosh! A red figure dashed through the holes with intense speed, causing more parts of the walls to break and expanding the size of the holes. The figure came to a stop before the body of Eden, which was laying on the floor with a sunken face. A fountain of blood was spilling from his face and head. The figure, who happened to be Miss Amy, raised her foot and stomped down upon his face again. Bang! The sound of flesh being mangled and hard skull cracking resounded across the place as blood spilled across the floor. "You really have guts. For you to lay hands on my student." Miss Amy's voice was cold as ice. "How dare you? Stomp! How dare you? Stomp! How dare you? Stomp! How dare you?" This time she raised her foot very high and stomped on his chest. Bang! Her foot crushed his sternum and down his lungs, causing another splatter of blood. Miss Amy raised her blood-soaked foot and placed them on the floor back. Her blue shoe was soaked in blood. She noticed the man was no longer moving and squatted to pick him up. She held onto his head that was battered beyond recognition and raised it. She picked a pill out from her storage device and looked for his mouth, which was almost missing due to the disastrous way his face looked. She placed the pill in his mouth. "You're not dying on me yet. You still have a lot of pain to go through at my hands," Miss Amy voiced out while dragging him by the hair towards the darkroom where Gustav was held captive. Eden's face was slowly recovering, along with his chest and lungs. His body was healing up at a very fast rate, as it would seem Miss Amy gave him a very high-graded healing medicine. Miss Amy dragged him back into the room and lifted him. "You will tell me who you work for and why you came after him," Miss Amy stated with a threatening tone. Eden was starting to regain consciousness after the initial beating. He shivered upon seeing her face. Ash-colored hair, beautiful but very cold looks. It reminded him of young Master Young. "It's her." I'm finished. A cold stream of sweats ran down his bloody back. "Before you tell me what I want to hear," Miss Amy said while dashing towards the wall on the right and holding onto his hair. Swoosh! She arrived before the wall and paused her movement before smashing his face into it. Bang! Chapter 68. Bang! Eden's face crashed through the wall, causing debris to scatter across the place. Miss Amy dragged him by the hair again and dashed towards the wall on the other side. Bang! She slammed his face into the wall again, causing it to collapse entirely, but she still wasn't done yet. Swoosh! Bang! Swoosh! Bang! Swoosh! Bang! Swoosh! Bang! Swoosh! Bang! She repeated the same actions severally until there were no walls left within the vicinity. Only corridors that led to different places within the facility could be seen. But it would seem Miss Amy wasn't satisfied with the pain she had inflicted on him. She clenched his hair tight and used it to lift him. Eden's face was practically crushed again. His teeth were missing. His nose completely caved into his face. Both eyes were swollen and bleeding. Miss Amy brought out another pill and placed it in his mouth. He started healing up once again. Immediately he regained consciousness. He started pleading for mercy, but Miss Amy acted like she couldn't hear him. There were no longer walls, but the ground was available. She lifted him high before slamming his face down with intensity. Boom! This time it sounded like an earthquake as the ground split open. Cracks covered a radius of over 500 feet from the point of impact. Miss Amy lifted Eden by the head again and raised him high up before slamming his face back onto the ground. Boom, 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 boom. The entire structure shook like it was going to come crashing down as Miss Amy slammed Eden's face into the ground repeatedly. A small pool of blood was already forming within the 3-feet-wide hole that Eden's face had created from being slammed on the ground repeatedly. Miss Amy raised Eden by his hair again and placed another healing pill in his mouth. Plase, Jusd KLLME, Eden voiced out hoarsely. Kill? Miss Amy said rhetorically. It's too early for that. I haven't even started. Miss Amy as she dragged him across the ground towards the bed-like chair on the left side of the room. You strapped him on this chair, didn't you? Miss Amy asked another rhetorical question before she lifted him again and placed him on the chair. Eden was like a weak and defenseless chicken before her. Miss Amy strapped him to the mechanical chair that was glued to the hard ground. She held onto Eden's head again and stared into his eyes with a devilish smile on her face. How do you think it would feel to lose a body part and have it regenerated only for you to lose it again and have it regenerated once again? Wouldn't the repetition of this procedure be magnificent? Eden's eyes widened in fear as he heard that. No, please, no. He started begging once again. Miss Amy acted like she wasn't listening and moved towards his right. She grabbed his right arm and released it from being strapped. Why don't we start with this one? Miss Amy said with a smirk. No, please doing. Eden tried pulling his arm back as he begged. Miss Amy smiled once again while her grip on his arm became stronger. No, please doing TDO. Eden was still trying to plead with her when Miss Amy pulled his arm with force. Yank. The sound of tendons and cartilage forcefully being ripped apart reverberated across the room. Kyrar. He screamed out in pain like a pig being slaughtered as he stared at his right shoulder, which was spraying out a fountain of blood. His shoulder was missing an arm. Miss Amy raised the arm, she tore off his shoulder and threw it towards the side. Kyrar. Eden was still screaming in pain. He had never felt such pain since his arm had never been ripped off his shoulder before. Snot and tears filled his face. It was obvious that he was going through indescribable pain at this moment. He wanted to pass out to escape from feeling such pain, but he couldn't. He could only keep screaming out as he watched his shoulders squirt out more and more blood. Oh, this is just the beginning. There's more to come, Miss Amy said as she walked over to Eden's left side. Eden, who was still in pain, slowly turned his head towards the side as he felt his left arm being gripped. His eyes were filled with dread as he saw Miss Amy holding onto his left arm. He wanted to plead again, but before he could, Miss Amy pulled his left arm with force again. Muscles and ligaments disconnected as his left arm was pulled out of its sockets. Kyr. Eden screamed out again after losing his second arm. Blood squirted out of the left side of his shoulder. Miss Amy threw the second arm away and moved towards his legs. In Gustav's apartment, he sat on his bed with a small triangular-looking device in his hand. Why is Miss Amy taking so long? Gustav questioned no one in particular with a low tone. If she plans to check the place out, it should only take a few minutes. It's been almost an hour now, Gustav muttered. He looked around with a contemplative expression. To think I'd actually be taken because of the mountain phenomenon? Gustav's mind recalled the last day's event. After his head was slammed to the ground by Eden, he pretended to have passed out. The man was stronger than him, so trying to escape by using more power or transforming would only reveal more of his secrets, which would end up in disaster for him. Since he would still be taken either way, he decided to pretend that he had passed out and made use of that opportunity to observe where he would be taken to using his perception. His perception granted him the ability to see his surroundings with his senses even if his eyes were closed. He memorized the path that the car took, the turning, and movements. None of them escape his senses. When he was strapped on the chair and noticed the brain tweak helmet, he thought that would be the end for him since he might end up spewing the truth about everything. To his surprise, something happened when the helmet was placed on his head. Host brain functions are being hijacked by external forces. Mental fortitude needed for blocking mind invasion. 25. Host has acquired enough mental fortitude to block mind invasion. Mind invasion has been successfully blocked. Chapter 69. When Gustav saw the notification, he was extremely shocked, but he was quick-witted enough not to show the expression of surprise on his face. He decided to act like his mind was actually being manipulated. Gustav pretended to be mind-controlled by the brain tweak helmet. The information he gave them about the mountain phenomenon was the same as what the locals around there gave. He only added more details to it than they did. He mentioned that there was an outburst of purplish electricity that sent destructive charges across the body of the mountain after the star slammed into it. Since he happened to be closer to the mountain than others, Eden didn't have a shred of doubt in Gustav's words. Gustav was able to easily deceive them with his actions due to the fact that they were in a hurry to get the information out of him and return him to his apartment. If they had studied him a bit more, they may have figured it out. Alas, they didn't. He could tell that they were tensed, but he didn't know why. Gustav also faked brain damage so they wouldn't feel cautious towards him. It would have been weird if he wasn't affected, since the brain tweak helmet could even turn adults as old as 22 years into vegetables. He was able to get a proper outline of the facility and the routes that led him there when he was being taken back to his apartment. He also sensed a destructive force within the facility that made him feel really suspicious towards the abductors. They were already suspicious for trying to abduct him in the first place and successfully doing that now. He could already sense that they probably worked for a big shot in the city, since they could go around abducting people however they wanted. Gustav was afraid they knew about the system earlier, whenever he recalled almost being abducted 3 months back, but now he had confirmed that they didn't know anything about it. They were only suspicious about the energy that radiated from the mountain after the impact of the blast that led to it being halved. Gustav knew the energy probably came from the system which was now inside him, so it would definitely be a disaster if he revealed that. Gustav thanked his stars that he stuck with even distribution. If not, his mind would have probably been taken over. The destructive force he sensed within the facility made him feel more suspicious about these unknown people. Immediately, he was returned to his apartment. He contacted Miss Amy. He was surprised that she already knew that he was abducted, since it happened only about 2 hours ago. He explained the situation to her and where the facility was located. He had been returned to his apartment an hour ago, which was also when he spoke to her. Gustav had tried contacting Miss Amy again after this, but he couldn't connect to her device. Gustav decided to open the system interface to check on his attributes. Host attributes: name, Gustav level, 5 class, EXP, 1850/25,000 HP, 320/320 energy, 150/150 the attributes: strength, 34 perception, 34 mental fortitude, 34 agility, 34 speed, 34 bravery, 34 intelligence, 34 charm, 34 attributes points, 24. He had evenly distributed all the points and kept stored some for emergencies, so even if his mental fortitude wasn't up enough, he would have been able to add more points to it in that situation to save himself. Doesn't this mean mental fortitude can protect from anything that has to do with mind control? This made Gustav see mental fortitude in a new light. He didn't see it as a necessary stat beforehand, yet he placed points in it like the others. Now that he understood what it could do, he realized that it could turn out to be a very useful attribute. Protection for the mind was absolutely necessary. His perception and intelligence had also helped him today. He was able to properly analyze the routes taken to get to the facility due to his perception, while his intelligence helped him in memorizing every single turn and swerve. He was even able to calculate the distance from the street he was abducted down to the facility. The facility happened to be an underground laboratory located towards the east of the city. That particular area wasn't too far from the mountain he usually visited when he tried committing suicide. He was able to easily describe how to get there to Miss Amy. Gustav checked some other things before he stood up and walked towards the door. He was tired of sitting around. The suspense was already killing him. He wanted to know what was happening and if Miss Amy had checked out the facility like she said she would. He had decided he would visit that mountain region again. His apartment door slid open and he walked out. Immediately he arrived in the corridor, he saw Angie approaching his apartment from the other end. Gustav, Angie voiced out in confusion as she stood in place with a surprised look. Hey Angie. Gustav kept walking forward with a smile on his face. Angie ran forward and grabbed hold of Gustav. Are you okay? Did they harm you? She asked while checking Gustav's body for injuries. I'm okay. Gustav smiled warmly while answering. Thanks for informing my teacher, Angie, he added with a look of gratitude. Angie was smitten by his charming smile, which was very rare. She stared at him for a few seconds before turning her head towards the side in embarrassment. It's nothing, she replied. How did you know I was abducted? How did you escape from there? Both of them asked at the same time, with Gustav being the former and Angie being the latter. Hee. Angie smiled sheepishly. They'll answer first then. Gustav was about to reply to her when he sensed something and stared at the stair area. Calm, 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 calm. The sound of heels colliding with the ground could be heard. A female in black top and blue jeans entered into the corridor from the stairways. She noticed the duo and started walking towards them. Angie also heard the sound of footsteps and turned around to see who was approaching. Miss Amy. Gustav and Angie voiced out together. Miss Amy arrived before them and also stared at Gustav in a similar way to how Angie did. Are you okay? She asked with a worried tone. I'm fine, Miss Amy. Nothing of consequence happened, Gustav answered. Miss Amy nodded with a relieved look. Did Miss Amy go shopping? Angie voiced out with a look of bewilderment as she stared at Miss Amy's wear, which was different from what she saw her clothed in earlier. Oh, I couldn't help it since my wares had stains. Although the color of the stains has certain similarities with the color of my initial clothing, it won't be sensible to keep wearing it, Miss Amy explained. Gustav didn't have an idea of what Miss Amy was putting on earlier, so he didn't make much of her words. Gustav, let's go. We have to talk, Miss Amy said and walked forward. Angie'll see you later. Gustav turned around and walked towards Miss Amy. By Gustav. Angie waved at Gustav as she spoke. Miss Amy got to Gustav's door and it slid open for her without having to use keys. Gustav's mouth hung wide open as he saw that. His jaw was nearly falling to the floor. How did you get it to open without a key? Gustav asked Miss Amy after entering his apartment. Your security details suck over here. A burglar could easily break into your home, Miss Amy answered bluntly. Looks like the installments of security protocols are really needed, Gustav sighed internally. By the way, Miss Amy, how did you know that this was my apartment? You've never been to my apartment, Gustav asked with a dumbfounded look. Are you sure about that? Miss Amy smiled with a playful look. Ugh, Gustav exclaimed with a look of confusion. Anyways, we have other important things to discuss. Miss Amy's voice suddenly became solemn when she said this. Chapter 70. Did you discover the place? Gustav asked while sitting on the couch. Miss Amy also sat opposite him. Did your abductor look like this? Miss Amy brought out a rectangular device and tapped on the screen. A holographic image of Eden wearing his half-green mask was displayed. Yes, that's him, but he wasn't alone. There was also another. Before Gustav could complete his sentence, another holographic image was shown. This time another face was displayed. It was a man sporting yellow hair and beards. Gustav recognized this man as the second person within the room, who also happened to be inside the car that they used in transporting him to the underground facility. Yes, he's also one of them, Gustav stated as he pointed at the projected image. Good. Looks like the hospital didn't receive the wrong guests. On hearing that, Gustav could already sense that something must have gone down. Miss Amy, what did you do? Gustav asked. Nothing much. Just put a group of people in a state where they'll never be able to bother anyone again. While Miss Amy was speaking, more projections were displayed one after the other. Gustav was only able to recognize 3 earlier. The rest of the 7 were unknown to him. Looks like Miss Amy went on a full rating session. That's probably why she came so late. Gustav was gobsmacked as he came to this realization. Miss Amy, did they say anything about who sent them? Gustav inquired. About that, it's a very tricky person. This person happens to be the brother of Hung Joe, your former classmate. His name is Young Joe, Miss Amy revealed. Also the first son of the Joe technological industry that helps the Embio create their weapons, armors, and other tools, Miss Amy added. Gustav's eyes slightly widened in realization. Is it because of that? Gustav asked. No, far from it. He has no idea about what you did to Hung Joe. You just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, Miss Amy responded. Gustav sighed in relief after hearing that. But if I wasn't there, he'll probably not receive this power, Gustav shrugged internally. There was no way he would change his decision of going to that mountainside to experience the same thing all over again if he traveled back in time. He's the type that is very shrewd, cunning, and meticulous. Even though I've found out that he's responsible for this, there is no way to deal with him on the surface, but I have managed to place the embryo on his tail, so he will have to lay low for now, Miss Amy said. She noticed the slight look of distraught on Gustav's face and added, You don't have to worry about it. Such people won't come after you again, I can guarantee that. You just have to focus on your path. I won't deal with your peers for you, but when it comes to big bullies like these old bastards that are beyond you, they'll step in. Miss Amy assured Gustav. It's in him. Thanks, Miss Amy. Gustav smiled while replying. Miss Amy returned the smile for a few seconds before her face became solemn again. I found what you were referring to, and just as you said, it was truly something dangerous, Miss Amy stated. What is it, Miss Amy? Gustav asked with an intrigued look. That facility has been experimenting on mixture of energies. Miss Amy replied. Mixture of energies? Gustav asked with a confused look. Are you aware of the different energy crystals mined underground? Miss Amy asked. Yes, my FA. The man who biologically brought me into this world works as a miner, so I know a bit about it, Gustav said with a contemplative look. There are several hundred mines all over the world, but only 7 different energy crystals exist which can be used for different technological purposes. According to a ton of research, due to their diversity, Gustav's eyes suddenly widened when he got to this point. Mixing them can cause a catastrophic disaster since they happen to be unstable together. Miss Amy nodded in affirmation. It is against the law to mix them. A crime punishable by death, because experiments like that have been performed in the past which led to the destruction of an entire city, Miss Amy said with a dark look. Gustav gasped in shock upon hearing that. Destruction of an entire city? It was nearly unbelievable for him, but he had to believe it since it was coming from Miss Amy's mouth. In this age, destroying an entire city was practically an impossible feat because different technological security protocols are put in place. If an alien race tried to invade in this age, they would find out that the Earth is not an easy target. This made Gustav believe it to be impossible for a city to be destroyed no matter how powerful the cause was supposed to be, but now his beliefs were being overthrown again. The amount of energy that is created from mixing the power contained within the energy crystals is capable of causing extinction to all races living on Earth, and according to the Slarkovs, this was one of the reasons for the destruction of their planet thousands of years ago, Miss Amy explained with a slightly worried tone. Gustav couldn't imagine how powerful such energies were after hearing this, but it made him wonder why anyone would try mixing them since they have been proven to be dangerous. This is his doing, but the reasons for him mixing those energies are unknown. It might be a little hard to tackle him since he's very good at hiding his tracks. Even this incident cannot be connected to him. Miss Amy said, Then what do we do now? Gustav asked. Not we. This matter is none of your business anymore. It's up to the MBO to investigate now. I'm only telling you about it because you kind of got involved. He's probably forgotten about you now since you have nothing to do with whatever he's planning, Miss Amy said. Gustav nodded in understanding to her response. You did well in quickly informing me about the location. Now those people will owe me a favor. I should take you out on a date again, Miss Amy voiced with a smile. But he'll probably be busy for a while. I don't mind. Whenever you're ready, Miss Amy. Gustav was now feeling slightly relieved, but there was still a nagging feeling deep down like he could sense that this still had a kind of connection to him. He decided to place that feeling behind him. Chapter 71. The next morning Gustav woke up at his regular timing. He still couldn't forget yesterday's events, but Miss Amy's assurance made him feel less cautious. He still went for his usual neighborhood watch last night, even though he knew mixed breeds were unlikely to show up and truly none showed up. Gustav got prepared for school and left with Angie once again. Several minutes later, he had arrived at the school and headed for the kitchen to start his morning job. Boss Danzo had noticed the changes in Gustav, him growing colder and colder by the day. Although he never showed Boss Danzo that side of him, Boss Danzo was vigilant enough to notice this. He decided he would talk with Gustav one of these days. During the school activities, the students were paired in the training hall to spar with one another due to the upcoming exchange event. Gustav was paired with a student of Class 3D and who also happened to be a D-grade mixed blood. The spars were for the purpose of training them, and it started last week. Gustav had been revealing a bit of his prowess since last week. He had been drawing attention to himself for some reason which was unknown to everyone. He would never use any bloodline abilities when sparing, but he would dodge every single attack from whoever he was sparing with, causing them to feel humiliated about not being able to touch him. Although he didn't reveal much, this was enough for him to draw attention to himself, since a mixed blood below F grade was able to avoid attacks of other higher-graded mixed bloods. Everyone was busy with their sparring partners. There were many small circles in the hall. Everyone faced the sparring partner they were paired with. Inside the circles, the small circles were barricaded by a blue glow that blocked the attacks from phasing out of the space so it wouldn't hit another person by mistake. There were hundreds of this small circle, and each one was as spacious as a boxing ring. Gustav was also within one, positioned at the west corner of the hall. Swoosh! Swoosh! Gustav swerved left and right as he dodged the circular balls of energy that were being sent at him. Swoosh! He sped towards the left side of the student he was sparring with. The student reacted by covering his right hand in a glow of blue energy before punching towards Gustav. Swoosh! Gustav dashed towards his back, causing the student to miss him. The student turned around and swung his hand towards the back, hoping to hit Gustav, but he was still too slow as Gustav dodged him. Gustav dashed towards his front again. The student was already starting to get frustrated, so he summoned a lot of blue energy balls. Pop, 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 pop. 20 of them appeared in midair and surrounded him. He sent them towards Gustav with speed. Each energy ball was the size of a fist. Swai! The balls traveled towards Gustav, cackling with a force that could easily tear a hole through a person. 5 of them appeared in front of him at the same time, only leaving small gaps between one another. Gustav moved towards the middle with speed as turned his body sideways. Since he didn't want to make use of dash, his normal speed was only a bit faster than these balls, so trying to dodge all of them seemed pretty impossible. Size manipulation. Immediately after Gustav said this in his mind, his body suddenly deflated. His chest and back seemed to be caving in like a balloon that was being deflated. He became so flat that he could be mistaken for plywood. Doing this, while his body was turned sideways, allowed the balls to miss him and keep flying forward. The student's mouth was wide open after seeing Gustav's performance. How was he able to do that? He wasn't the only person that saw Gustav do that. 2 more people whose circle happened to be positioned on their right saw him. Time to change partners, their instructor voiced out. The one on the left side was glaring at him with a weird look. Hey, Gustav, why don't you spar with me this time? The male student proposed. He was about 62 and had short orange-colored hair. He had a slim body but a very confident look that was very similar to a prideful one. His eyes were sharp and brimming with life. This student was the person Gustav had been aiming for since, reasons unknown. He wanted to spar with him to check out something, but he needed him to be the one to propose the spar. Charles Yemen. Gustav stared at him for a bit before answering. Sure. Gustav walked towards his circle while the student that was sparring with Charles earlier walked towards Gustav's former sparring partner. Hoo-hoo, Gordon, watch how it's done. It's pathetic that you can't land a single hit on him, Charles said with a look of contempt as he stared at Gustav's former partner. Some of the students around had left, forgotten that they were supposed to be sparring right now. They decided to watch Gustav spar with Charles. Gustav not receiving a single hit since this training started was already ticking off some people, but they didn't have the guts to go meet Gustav and ask for a sparring session with him, due to fear of being humiliated. Now that they were seeing that Charles and Gustav were about to spar, they believed Gustav would receive his retribution today. The blue glow barricaded the circle, and they were surrounded by it. The same happened in the other circles, but some of them seemed to be focusing on Gustav's and Charles' circle instead of sparring. Surprisingly, their instructor, who happened to be watching from afar, didn't say anything about the students not minding their business. You seem to have gotten quite stronger recently. Hoo-hoo-hoo, that won't help you in this situation. Charles laughed like a maniac as he stared at Gustav. Is this speech necessary? Don't waste my time with it. Gustav voiced out with a look of boredom. Charles' face twisted upon hearing that. Then I won't show you any mercy. Charles spoke with a dark look and dashed towards Gustav. Red electric snakes danced around his body as he arrived in front of Gustav after taking only a single step. Gustav swerved towards the side, dodging him by only a small margin. Charles noticed that he missed. He reacted by raised his hands and conjuring red electricity in between his palms before extending them out towards Gustav. A thick, snaky line of red electric charges blasted towards Gustav. This was when Gustav finally activated Dash. The speed of the snaky electricity was extremely fast, and he had already predicted this, so he activated Dash before Charles was able to send it out. Gustav turned towards the right, causing the red electricity to miss him by only a few inches, but that wasn't all that happened. Gustav could feel a force from the electricity that was pushing him backward. He distanced himself more from the electricity charge while Dash was still activated and felt the force decrease. If not for his activation of Dash that practically slowed down everything around him, that force would have knocked him backward. Chapter 72. Just as I thought, it truly has gravitational force, Gustav analyzed as he moved towards Charles' back and tried to touch him. Due to the usage of Dash, Charles was still moving in slow motion, but his eyes were able to follow Gustav. Charles wanted to change the direction of his attack to Gustav's new location, but even though his eyes were able to follow, his body movements were still slower. Gustav arrived behind him and pushed out his palm to touch Charles' back. Zun. When Gustav's palm was 3 inches away from touching Charles, it paused and was unable to move forward. Gustav was astonished, but not surprised cause he already sensed the force surrounding Charles that repelled any form of contact. Charles turned around and hurled his fist coated in electric snakes towards Gustav's chest. Gustav dodged it, of course, and dashed backward. How in the world is he able to move like that? Charles was shocked at Gustav's movement. The other students watching were just as shocked. They had no idea why Gustav would be able to move like that. Now I understand why his bloodline is compared to be minus grade even though it's a C grade. That's pretty powerful, Gustav analyzed from the other side, as both of them stared at one another with wary looks. Charles was already a Zulu ranked 2, but Gustav noticed his strength was decent than most Zulu ranked mixed bloods he had faced recently. This was mostly attributed to his bloodline ability that had gravitational force mixed in. Just because you can move that fast doesn't mean you can defeat me, you. Before Charles could finish his statement, Gustav gave a low bow and spoke. Thanks for the sparring session. After saying this, he walked out of the circle. Hey, wait, trash. I must trample you under my feet before you leave. Charles shouted out, but Gustav didn't reply. He kept walking till he left the area where the spar was taking place. Charles had a look of anguish as he saw Gustav ignore him. Chatter, 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 chatter. The hall became noisy after seeing that brief spar. Dash, isn't he supposed to be weakling? Dash, why is he able to move that fast? Although they have heard the news of how Gustav uses enhancement drugs, they were not so stupid as to not see that something was different about him. They couldn't tell what was happening, but they knew it would be impossible to make use of such drugs every single time, which further made them confused about the source of Gustav's improvement. Seeing the stares of everyone around him, Charles was enraged and started shouting for Gustav to come back into the circle so they could continue their spar, but his calls fell on deaf ears. Hey, instructor, I'm leaving. Gustav waved to the instructor as he headed out. The middle-aged-looking male instructor stared at Gustav with a look of confusion. Your class will be representing the school in the exchange event. Training is necessary, he voiced out. Nah, I'm not interested. Besides, what would Trash do in such an event? You're better off with those failures behind me, Gustav said and walked out with a smirk. The entire hall erupted in chaos after hearing Gustav's statement, but he wasn't fazed. He dipped his hands into his pockets and kept walking forward without looking back. The aloofness on his face, along with the way he walked, made everyone stare at him with a look of astonishment from behind. Even the instructor was shocked, but he couldn't do anything. He heard about Miss Amy training Gustav and suspected that his current improvement might have something to do with that. Also, he couldn't force Gustav to stay back since he had decided he wasn't participating. Gustav walked towards his personal training room within the hall. First phase completed, Gustav said internally with a smile as he stood within his training room. The day came to an end again quite uneventfully if Gustav's act was subtracted. After his training with Miss Amy today, she told him their training days would be shortened to 3 days a week. Gustav could tell that she seemed busy. She wasn't in school throughout the day. Even though he was still bothered by what happened recently, he decided to place it behind him and focus on the task at hand. Gustav arrived at his apartment and met Angie waiting in front of his door. "Hey, Angie," Gustav greeted after seeing her. "Hey, Gustav," Angie answered with a sweet smile. Is there a problem? Why are you standing at my door?" Gustav asked with an inquisitive gaze. He was starting to wonder if this would become a regular routine for her. "Yes. No. We have to talk," Angie stuttered repeatedly before completing her sentence. Gustav's left eyebrow slightly went up before he replied. "I already know what you want to talk about. The answer is no. Go home, Angie," Gustav said and proceeded to open his door. Angie grabbed him from behind. "What if you're abducted again?" Angie said with a worried tone. "That won't happen. And even if it does, you won't be able to do anything about it," Gustav said and proceeded to open his door. "I'm sure I can help. I'm at Zulu rank already," Angie kept insisting. "The answer is no, Angie." Gustav walked forward, causing his cloth to slip from her grasp. Sleeve. The door slid open and closed back after Gustav walked in. Gustav frowned after entering his living room. Why is she so persistent? He pondered internally. After thinking for a few seconds, Gustav sighed. "She was smart enough to figure out that I was abducted and informed Miss Amy, so I have to give her the benefit of the doubt at least," Gustav said internally and turned around to open his door. He walked out and arrived at the corridor. You're still here?" Gustav voiced out in surprise. Angie was still standing beside his door. "I was leaving already," Angie pouted as she spoke, but she still stood in the same position. Chapter 73. I wanted to give you a chance, but since you said you're leaving, then all right, bye," Gustav said and turned around. When did I say that?" Angie said with a frantic look as she reached out to grab him. "I thought you were leaving?" Gustav turned around with a look of confusion. "No, I'm not leaving. Please give me a chance," Angie said with a pleading look. Gustav chuckled internally after seeing her reaction. "All right then," Gustav said with a solemn look. "Your bloodline grants you speed, right?" Gustav asked. Angie nodded in affirmation. "If you can beat me in a race, they'll let you join me during the night patrols," Gustav proposed. Angie's eyes slightly widened. "Beat you in a race?" she questioned with a doubt. "Yes, if you cannot do this, then I'm afraid you can't work with me." Gustav crossed his arms and leaned his back against his door while waiting for her response. "But this is unfair. You're obviously faster than I am," Angie said with a crestfallen look. "Then you won't be of much help since I can do what you're supposed to be good at. Better than you can," Gustav said and proceeded to turn around once again. "Wait, I agree." Angie quickly stopped him before he headed in. Gustav smirked while facing the door before turning around. His face had returned to its usual aloofness after turning to face Angie. "Good. Remember, if you lose, you mustn't disturb me about joining me to observe the neighborhood," Gustav stated with a solemn voice. "H&M?" Angie nodded in response. "Good, let's go," Gustav said and proceeded to walk forward. "Where are we going?" Angie asked. "Just follow me," Gustav said with a commanding tone. Angie complied and followed Gustav. Some minutes later, Gustav and Angie had arrived at the sparse forest area behind the neighborhood. They stood in a particular spot where small trees could be seen scattered around. Gustav finally stopped walking when he arrived in between two trees that were spaced apart by 50 feet. "We will be racing to that tree over there." Gustav pointed at a particular tree ahead that was more than 15 meters tall. It was one of the tallest trees around here, so even though it was a bit far, it could still be seen clearly. Their current distance from here to there was over 2,000 meters. "The first to touch that tree wins," Gustav exclaimed. "All right," Angie answered and got into a running stance. Gustav had remembered that Angie's speed before she got to the Zulu rank was around 40 feet per second. So he believed that even though she had gotten to the Zulu rank, she should at most have increased by 2 times. which meant it would still take her more than a minute to get there while he only needed to activate dash, and he would be able to arrive at the tree before 1 minute was up. New quest has been issued. Race Angie without activating a speed-related ability. What the heck is this? Gustav stared at the notification with a puzzled look. Why now of all times? Is the system trying to shit on my head? Gustav couldn't understand the reason behind this sudden quest, even though he tried. If he decided to try completing the quest, he would be using his normal speed, and at the moment he had no idea about Angie's current speed. There was no way to figure out if he was faster or not. I can't lose this race and risk her coming along with me every night. Gustav pondered with a slightly worried look. Is everything all right? Angie asked from the side after noticing that Gustav kept staring forward weirdly. Yes, are you ready? Gustav asked. H&M, Angie replied with a small nod. On the count of 3, Gustav also got into a running stance. He crouched his knees a little as his face looked a bit more serious than it used to. 1. He started counting. 2. He stared forward at the tree ahead with concentration. 3. Immediately Gustav called out the third number. Both their bodies bolted forward with extreme speed. Swash, swash. Their bodies blurred slightly as they traveled across the sparse forest region. In one movement, they had both crossed 70 feet, causing mild winds to generate from their body movement as they streaked past small trees. They streaked past trees like phantoms, getting closer to the goal as seconds passed. Both of them were currently moving at the same amount of speed. Angie was surprised that she was able to keep up with Gustav as they raced. She moved slightly to the left as she ran, dodging a tree that was formerly in her path. Swerve, swerve. Just like her, Gustav had to dodge several small trees on his path, but even with that, no one had surpassed the other in distance after running for 15 seconds. Tap, 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 tap. Their tapping footsteps could be heard as they fiercely ran across the forest, causing small clouds of dust and leaves to gather in a straight line following their footsteps. Gustav and Angie already knew they were at the same level of speed at this time, so they both pushed themselves to move faster. As 30 seconds passed by, they crossed 1,000 meters. They were only about 1,500 meters away from the tree now. They both kept pushing as their speed increased to 80 feet per second. Gustav was already thinking about using dash as they closed in on the tree. He noticed that Angie was getting faster as they ran. Gustav had already pushed his normal speed to the limit, yet she was slowly surpassing him. He couldn't let Angie win, but he also didn't want to lose the quest. This put him in a dilemma. As they were 500 meters away from the tree, Gustav was starting to catch up with Angie again. She seems to be running out of stamina. Gustav turned his head to the side to stare at Angie after noticing that she had slowed down. Chapter 74. Huh. What's she doing? Gustav noticed that Angie had closed her eyes while running, yet she was still able to dodge the trees along her path. Angie, who had her eyes closed, suddenly opened them. If I'm going to win, it must be by an outstanding gap. As Angie said this in her mind, another horn could be seen growing out of her forehead. She initially had 2 horns, but with this, it became 3. Swoosh! Her speed suddenly increased exponentially. She started racing ahead of Gustav. What? Gustav was surprised to see Angie suddenly grow another horn, which caused her speed to increase. In 5 seconds, she had already surpassed Gustav by almost 50 feet. Gustav was struggling to catch up with her at this point. As they crossed another 100 meters, Gustav noticed that she was increasing the gap between them more. I have to use it, Gustav said in his mind after noticing the increase in the gap between them widened even further. Add 10 attributes points to speed. Plus 10 attributes points has been added to speed. Swoosh. Gustav's speed also increased by a notch, and he started closing in Angie. Right now, they were only 300 meters from the tree. Gustav was starting to close in the gap. From 50 feet, it reduced to 40 and then to 30 in a few seconds. Both of them were moving at a speed of around 100 feet per second, so even though Gustav was closing up on her, he calculated that she would still get to the tree before he did. At this point, they were around 100 meters away from getting to the tree, and Gustav was 7 feet behind Angie. Add 5 attributes point to speed, Gustav said internally. Plus 5 attributes points has been added to speed. Swoosh. Gustav's speed suddenly increased again. It was like adding nitro to a rocket launcher. In the next 3 seconds, the tree was already in front of Gustav. SHSSHHH. His feet slid across the ground after he came to a pause suddenly. Tap. Gustav placed his hand on the tree as he arrived before it. He sighed in relief and turned towards the left to stare at Angie. Huh. Angie was also staring back at him, and they both had their hands on the tree. A tie? Gustav had the urge to facepalm. Angie also had a crestfallen look on her face. I didn't win. They both removed their hands from the stem of the tree and turned around with a contemplative expression. There were trails of dust in the direction they were coming from. Angie's third horn slowly went back into her head. She had a fatigued expression on her face. It was obvious that what she just did took up a lot of her energy. So, what's going to happen now? Angie asked with a slightly timid look. Quest has been completed. Rewards, 5,000 EXP. All attributes stats +1. Gustav noted the completion of the quest and the rewards. I had to spend almost all my saved-up points because of this, and yet Gustav was disappointed at the rewards. He has decided that the next time he was given a quest similar to this by the system, he would ignore it. You didn't win, he said to Angie. Angie looked more down upon hearing that. But I also didn't win. Since it was a tie, it'll give you a chance based on my conditions, Gustav added. Angie's eyes widened in excitement. Really? She questioned. Yes, but only if you can accept my conditions, Gustav stated. I accept your conditions, Angie voiced out with a smile. What? You haven't even listened to them yet, Gustav had a. You must be kidding me, kind of look as he stared at Angie. I don't care what they are. I accept, Angie said again. Oh, is that so? Gustav said with a smirk as he moved closer to Angie. H&M, Angie nodded cutely. What if I asked you to do something shameless? Gustav said as he moved his face closer to hers. Angie gasped in surprise as she stared at Gustav's face that was only several centimeters from hers. Something shameless? Angie's face started turning red as naughty imaginations streamed into her mind. Gustav kept moving his face closer to hers while still smirking. Yes, if I asked you to do something shameless, would you agree to it? Gustav asked again. Angie had to keep moving backward till her back was placed against the tree. Gustav extended his arm forward and placed his palm on the body of the tree beside Angie's face. He moved his face closer to hers again while leaning on the tree with his hand. Angie's face had turned completely beet red at this moment. Gustav looked so devilishly charming with the smirk on his face as he looked into her eyes without breaking contact. Their faces were only 3 centimeters from touching. Well, would you? Gustav asked again. Why, yes. Angie shyly looked away as she answered. Gustav was kind of surprised by her answer. He moved his hand away from the tree and turned around to walk forward. His face had gone back to being poker-like. All right then. He turned around to face her once again. Angie stared at his expression with a look of confusion. She could call Gustav a devil with the way he was acting. One moment he was cold and the next, he was seductive only for him to go back to being indifferent. I have a few conditions in mind. Gustav started speaking again. A few hours later, Gustav was already back in his apartment making more research on mixed breeds. Occasionally his thoughts would drift back to his race with Angie. He still wondered why she said she would agree to any of his demands regardless of what it was. Till now he didn't understand her thought process because other people would definitely not agree if he made absurd demands. If she continues this way, she's going to be badly hurt in the future, Gustav analyzed, but he hadn't thought of a way to help change her mindset. This night he would be patrolling alone since one of his conditions to her was she would only work with him on specific days of his choosing. 3 times a week, but he would pick the days himself. He had decided that he would only let her come with him on the days after he had defeated any mixed breed that appeared during the week. Chapter 75. 2 days had gone by again in a flash. Gustav was currently in the dojo, taking a break after training with Miss Amy. He and Miss Amy sat on the floor with their legs crossed as they discussed. Miss Amy, I've been wanting to ask, why do we have to wear yukatas when training? Gustav said with an intrigued look. You don't know about the history of this place? Miss Amy asked while turning to stare at him. Gustav shook his head in denial. Miss Amy decided to explain after seeing that Gustav had no idea about this place. This entire building is owned by a business group named Octavia. It's one of the most affluent business groups in the city, Miss Amy explained. The group is owned by a powerful family which originated from an ancient country known as Japan. In the olden days, Japan was one of the countries in an ancient continent named Asia that practiced martial arts. This yukata was a traditional outfit that originated from there. The family that owns this building also owns the dojo. They implemented their culture so it wouldn't be forgotten. Miss Amy concluded her explanation. Gustav now had a look of understanding. He already knew a thing or two about the ancient countries and part of their history, so Miss Amy's explanation made sense to him now. Miss Amy, that family, do you have a kind of connection to them? Gustav asked what had been bothering him for some time now. He had noticed the way Miss Amy was treated with respect around here. It made no sense that they would fear and respect her that much if she didn't have some kind of connection to the family that owned this building. Miss Amy squinted her eyes before replying. Who knows? Do I have a connection with them? Miss Amy shrugged and stood up. Let's continue, Miss Amy said. Gustav had a look of suspicion, but he decided not to pursue the matter. He stood up and continued his training with Miss Amy. Another day went by again. Today was a Thursday. For the past 3 days, Gustav hadn't visited the training hall to join his peers to spar. His classmates were still suspicious about him, but what he did the other day was starting to die down. They decided to focus on the upcoming exchange event. As for Angie, Gustav let her follow him on the night patrol for the last 2 days. The first night that she joined him, her father and mother came out of their apartment to plead with him to protect Angie in case of emergency. Angie felt very embarrassed, and she kept asking her parents to stop, but they refused. Gustav just nodded at them and left with Angie. He wasn't bothered since he already calculated that it wasn't time for a mixed breed to appear yet. He would only let Angie come with him on nights where he was sure that a mixed breed wouldn't show up anyways. He had asked Miss Amy about this weird phenomenon of mixed breeds crossing the border. She also couldn't understand why or how that was happening, but she promised Gustav that she would look into it when she had the time. For now, Gustav would still have to keep protecting the neighborhood, and he didn't mind since it was also bringing in money for him. He had also been selling parts and organs of mixed breeds secretly, which to his surprise also brought in a good amount of money. Gustav found out some time ago that organs of mixed breeds were also used to make drugs. He also found out that some restaurants cooked some luxurious meals using some of their organs. In school today, Gustav patiently waited for the day to end. He had been planning something for the past few days. It was time to put some of those plans in motion. The latter part of the day for Class 3 was always spent within the training hall. They would train there till the day ended. Trying. The sound of the closing bell reverberated across the school. Finally, school activities came to an end for the day. Class 3 students started streaming out of the hall in groups. Chatter, chatter, chatter. Friends moved together, chatting with one another in excitement as they walked out. 2 tall students, in particular, were walking together with each other. One had orange-colored hair while the other had black hair. Both of their hairs were the shoulder-length type, but they were quite tall. The one with the orange-colored hair was 62 while the other was 6 feet. Charles, are we going there today? The one with the black hair asked with a smile. Hoo-hoo. You bet we are, Gordon. I've held myself back for a week now with all this intense training. I must relieve all this pent-up stress. Charles replied with a mischievous smile. Hee. Yes, we should relieve our pent-up stress, Gordon answered back with a smile. Suddenly his face froze up. Speaking of relief, I must relieve my bowels. I need to head to the bathroom. Gordon's face squeezed up as he spoke. Eck again? Charles asked with a slightly frustrated look. I won't take long, please just wait, Gordon said and turned around to head for the bathroom inside the hall. I wonder what he ate? Charles had a slightly pissed-off look as he stared at Gordon, who was running towards the hall. Charles moved towards the side to wait for Gordon. 15 minutes later, Gordon was jogging towards Charles from the direction of the training hall. His face had a look of relief. He arrived before Charles and spoke. Let's go, Charles, he said. You sure you're up for it today? Charles asked with a slight tone of worry. Haha, why not? I wouldn't give up having fun with those sexy sluts for the entire world, Gordon replied. Besides, we have to release our pent-up stress from all the intense training we've been going through, Gordon added. All right, let's go then, Charles said and turned around. They moved towards the parking lot and arrived in front of a floating velvet-colored car. The car was similar in shape to a sports car like the old days Lamborghini and Bugatti. The differences were, it was floating above the ground. It had a whitish kind of flame oozing from underneath. It looked way neater and futuristic. It was thrice the size of those kinds of sports cars. Lastly, it was at least 10 times faster. There was already a driver waiting for them. He bowed to both of them politely before they entered. The driver got in and started the car. Zwarnen. The sound of the engine was so smooth and soothing. It sounded pleasant to the ears. Swee-hi-hi. It zoomed off with speed into the distance. Chapter 76. The interior of the car was so good-looking that it could be compared to a jet's cockpit. A guard on all black sat beside the driver's seat. He wore black shades also and had dark red hair, while the driver looked like a typical pushover with his scrawny build and honest-looking eyes. Yo, Ren, take us to that place, Charles voiced out from the back seat. As you wish, young master. The driver replied politely and pushed a button forward before grabbing hold of a small bar-like handle and pushing it forward. Swan. The car turned left at an intersection and kept speeding forward. Its speed was so fast that it blurred through the road streaking by several vehicles. In Plankton City, there were hardly any roads that had speed limits, but there was still some kind of speeds that were over the limit. An example would be moving at over 1,000 miles per hour, which was exactly how fast the car was moving. The thing was, no one could complain when they saw what type of car it was. A new modeled Vimpolo from the new Vimpolo Marcus series. A type of car that only the biggest shots in the city could afford. Their car arrived in front of a 5-story building. This part of the city was one of the busiest. It was always bustling with activity. People moved to and fro across the area. A lot of males and females streaked into this building that they arrived at. Most of the females that were walking in were laced in revealing garments. Most of them wore skimpy skirts that almost revealed their thighs completely, while some wore tight-fitted short gowns that revealed a lot of their cleavages, giving passers-by a sight for sore eyes. A glowing sign was hung up on the building that said, Maiden's Haven. This was a well-known business place in the city that the so-called righteous citizens would see as a sinful place. It was the combination of a pub, a club, and a first-class brothel. It was obvious that Charles and Gordon frequented this place to have fun. Charles and Gordon got down from the car. They had changed from their school uniforms into something more casual. Even with the casual wear, you could still tell that they had an influential background. The men standing at the entrance bowed to them as they walked into the building along with their guard who followed behind. Normally there was a queue to get in, but both of them got special treatment. Even the ladies on the line were whistling at them before they entered to get their attention. Immediately they got in after passing through the corridor. Loud music blasted into their eardrums. Dance to the beat, don't you want to get stoned? Move to the rhythm, drop that ass bomb flow with the bass, and get high on fun. CK them little bitches right in the holes. Some dirty music was playing out and strippers could be seen dancing on poles in front. The lights and the atmosphere gave off a party vibe. There were seats positioned at different corners, and people sat on tables with drinks placed in front of them, while some people were on the dance floor. Mostly ladies wriggling their butts. Young masters, welcome back. A beautiful female in short green and red gown approached them while greeting. She had long blue hair and pink bunny ears. Will it be the usual room today? She asked. Of course. That's the best place to have big fun, don't you think, Gordon? Charles tapped Gordon as he spoke. Huh. Oh yes, that room would be better. Gordon, who was absent-minded earlier, answered hurriedly. You're still having that stomach upset? Charles asked after noticing his weird behavior. Yes, Gordon answered with a slightly pained look. Tap. Don't worry. Once we're having fun with those beauties, it will pass. Charles tapped Gordon's shoulder while assuring him. Gordon nodded with a smile. Madame Farrell, get that room ready for us, and hoo-hoo. We want fresh blood today. Charles whispered into her bunny ear. The lady nodded with a smile and walked away while both of them picked a place to hang around in the meantime. 1 hour later, they were in the last room on the last floor. The room was luxurious with 2 large beds big enough to contain 15 people each. There were 7 beautiful females in revealing outfits serving drinks to Gordon and Charles. They danced and moved across the place seductively, swaying their hips towards Gordon and Charles. Laughter filled the room as they drank to their heart content and touched the bodies of the females in a dirty manner. Both of them had one female each sitting on their lap. Charles' right hand was currently inside the bra of the one on his laps. He blatantly fondled her breasts from underneath the bra while talking to Gordon. The lady was moaning loudly into his ears, and he kept laughing with excitement when he saw her expression. "Gordon, it's about time we ravished the beauties here. Hoo-hoo-hoo," Charles said with a lewd smile hung on his face. Gordon smiled back, but just as he wanted to reply, his face twisted in pain. Ugh. He threw the girl on his lap off him as he held onto his gut. Charles frowned. "Not again," he voiced with a disappointed look. Gordon stood up while holding his gut in pain. "Get out, all of you," he shouted. The females were wondering what was happening. "I said get out," he shouted again with his face squeezing in pain. The females scampered out of the room after hearing him shout for the second time. "Hey, you didn't have to chase them out. You could have just gone to do your thing in the bathroom," Charles said with a look of annoyance. Gordon kept holding his tummy while squatting slightly. "Help me, Charles," Gordon said with a pained voice. "What the hell did you eat?" Charles voiced out in dissatisfaction. "I ate our regular, so I don't know. Evan the pillaless didn't twark," Gordon said with a pained expression. All right," Charles replied and went to assist Gordon up. "Help me to the bathroom," Gordon added. Charles placed Gordon's hand on his shoulder and helped him to the bathroom within the room. Immediately they entered the bathroom. Gordon smirked and withdrew his arm from Charles' shoulder with force. Before Charles could react to that, Gordon suddenly straightened himself up and reached out to grab Charles' face. He lifted Charles off the ground with one arm and dashed towards the wall ahead. Swoosh! Immediately he arrived before the wall, which had a mirror placed on it. He slammed Charles' head into it. Bang! The mirror cracked and pieces were sent flying in all directions. Blood trickled from the point of impact, across the surface of the mirror, towards the wall, and down to the floor. Chapter 77. Charles was in extreme pain and confusion as his head was pinned to the broken mirror on the wall. Gordon pulled him away from the wall and lifted him before slamming his head onto the toilet seat. Bang! The seat broke into several small pieces and water squirted out of the hole. Gordon picked Charles up again and lifted him before slamming his knee into his jaw. Splurt! His upper and lower teeth were forcefully gnashed against one another, causing pieces of teeth to fly out of his mouth along with blood. He felt his skull vibrate due to the intense force from the kick. Charles hadn't even been given the chance to react to any of the attacks. They were all too sudden and fast for him to try and counter. He couldn't even understand what was happening. The runny stomach, the look of pain. Where was all that now? Another thought that came to his mind was, when did Gordon become strong enough to beat him in such a manner that he wouldn't be able to fight back? I need to activate my bloodline. This was the only way Charles felt he could escape from these chains of attacks. Bang! He slammed into the wall on the other side. Gordon dashed forward and threw out his fist towards Charles' chest. Just as his fist was close to making contact with Charles' chest, red electric snakes suddenly started appearing around Charles. These red electric snakes swam around his body. Gordon's fist was stopped several centimeters from touching Charles by a strange and invisible force. His fist couldn't move any closer. "WH at ARE yo you do want Gordon? They'll kill you," Charles shouted out with a look of anguish on his blood-soaked face. He proceeded to throw out a fist coated with red electricity. Even with his injuries, he was still as quick as ever, but to his surprise, Gordon swerved and dodged his fist with ease. "This time is not gonna be like the last time," Gordon voiced out as he threw out his palm towards Charles' chest. Charles wasn't even given the chance to process Gordon's statement before the palm tore through the invisible force protecting him and slammed into his chest with force. Bang! KRYYSHH. The sound of bones breaking could be heard as Charles' chest caved in and his back slammed into the wall more. Charles' eyes widened in shock and confusion as he spat out a mouthful of blood. That wasn't the end of it. Bam! 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 Bam, bam. One after the other, Gordon's palms kept slamming into Gordon's chest. He interchanged it between left and right repeatedly, and due to the speed, Charles' body remained pinned to the wall as he couldn't do anything but watch the attacks rain down brutally upon his body. Bam! The final palm strike caused his ribcage to collapse entirely as blood jetted out of his nose, eyes, and mouth. Why? He managed to mutter this question before his eyes closed up and he passed out. Plop. His body fell to the floor limply. For revenge and also, because I want your bloodline. Since Charles had passed out, he was unable to see the evil smirk on Gordon's face as well as his reply to him. Gordon turned around and walked towards the door. Click. He locked it and walked back towards the body of Charles. He slowly squatted in front of him and placed his hand on Charles' neck. You will suffer the same fate as your friend. Didn't you both enjoy bullying and torturing me back then? Gordon's voice had changed into that of another person. This voice sounded smooth and light masculine voice. Neither thick nor thin, more like soothing. Gordon's fingernails extended in length and pierced into Charles' neck, causing blood to drip towards the floor again. Hours ago, when school ended for the day, Gordon and Charles left the training hall together, but Gordon had a running stomach, so he asked Charles to wait while he went to use the toilet in the training hall. Gordon ran across the hall corridor with a sweat-filled face until he finally got to the bathroom located at the end. What he didn't notice was, there was a sign that said the bathroom was being cleaned up. He didn't notice this due to the way he was feeling extremely pressed. He entered the male's bathroom and walked towards one of the cubicles ahead. He also didn't notice that immediately he entered through the bathroom's door, a shadow streaked through the entrance before the door closed up. He arrived in front of the cubicle unbeknownst to him that there was someone following behind him. This person's footsteps were silent, so he didn't notice. Just as he pushed the door open, a hand grabbed onto him and pulled him backward. Ah! He moaned out in discomfort, but his voice was cut off by the palm that forcefully covered his mouth. He grabbed the hand and tried removing it from his mouth, but it would seem the assailant was way stronger than he was. The palm pressed more against his mouth as he felt an arm wrapping around his neck. Ghhhhhh. The arm tightened strongly around his neck, forcefully depriving him of oxygen. He kicked and clawed intensely in pain. He even tried using his elbows to hit the person in the guts, but it was like the person couldn't feel any pain. Whoisths? Hour. Etheyssostr on. No matter how much he hit the person behind him, they didn't stop choking him. Tears were already spilling from his eyes as he felt his throat being crushed. He tried activating his bloodline ability, but he couldn't focus with his brain short-circuiting due to lack of oxygen. After a few more seconds, his eyes rolled to the back and he passed out. The person who was holding onto him kept squeezing for a few more seconds before letting go of him. Plop. Gordon's body fell to the floor without any signs of movement. Not much of a hassle to defeat the likes of you. A thin, masculine voice was heard after the body fell to the floor. Chapter 78. Not much of a hassle to defeat the likes of you. A thin, masculine voice was heard after the body fell to the floor. It was a man in black pants, a red t-shirt, and a blue jacket. The man had an oblong-shaped face with long brown hair reaching his back. He stared at the body below as his fingernails extended to 3 inches in length. He squatted before the body of Gordon and grabbed onto his neck before lifting his head slightly off the ground. Let's get started then. The man had a huge grin on his face as his fingernails dug into Gordon's neck. Requirement for bloodline acquisition has been met. Analyzing host compatibility with energy transmutation, bloodline 0% per 100%. Analysis complete. 27%/100%. Host compatibility with energy transmutation bloodline is 27%. Host compatibility with this bloodline is lower than average. Does host still desire to acquire this bloodline? Yes/no. This is a first, the man muttered inwardly. This man was Gustav. He had changed his appearance into that of a teacher in the school, which was why he was looking this way. What happens if I acquire this bloodline the way it is? Gustav wondered as he stared at the notifications. Acquiring a bloodline that is lower than 50% compatibility rate ends up being less than F grade after successful extraction. Gustav stared at the new notification that popped up with a look of understanding. I'm guessing this is why the bloodline grades decrease when I acquire them. If the compatibility is 100%, I should be able to extract it successfully into my body without it decreasing in grade, Gustav analyzed. He was so amazed by this revelation that the system just replied to him after a few seconds had gone by. Wait, you answered me? Gustav voiced out with a look of surprise. He noticed the message that popped up earlier disappear and get replaced with that, which meant speechlessness. It's been 3 months already, Gustav added with a contemplative look after remembering that the system didn't communicate with him for that long. What does the host expect? A good morning and night greeting every day? It was Gustav's turn to be speechless. Host should return to his activities after all your hands are full at the moment. These words appeared after that for a few seconds then disappeared. Hey, what exactly are you? Gustav questioned. There was no reply this time. Hey, no reply again. Gustav called out several more times, but the system didn't reply to his call. Gustav knew it would be foolish to keep calling out to it, so he decided to continue what he was doing previously. It doesn't matter if the compatibility is low. So long as I can extract it, I will have another bloodline added to my collection which would give me more options when making use of recreation. This was Gustav's thought process as he decided to accept the bloodline. Yes, Gustav stated. Host has decided to acquire this bloodline. Bloodline extraction will now begin. Bright glowing crimson-colored veins appeared on the neck of Gordon who was laying on the ground. The veins extended deep down his neck, down his chest area, and kept going inwards. The bright glowing crimson veins transported that same color of blood upwards, towards Gustav's fingertips that were dug into his neck. The crimson glowing blood started flowing into Gustav's fingernails towards his wrists, straight upwards. His veins also glowed up with the same color. Bloodline extraction process, 50%/100%. Gustav had thought it would take longer to acquire the bloodline, but to his surprise, it took a shorter time than he expected. Congratulations! Host has acquired energy transmutation bloodline. In 5 more minutes, he saw the notification appear in his line of sight. Gustav withdrew his fingernails from the neck of Gordon, which was dripping blood. He waved his hand, causing the blood on his fingernails to splatter across the floor. His fingernails retracted, going back to their previous length as he brought out a healing medical pill from his storage device and placed it in Gordon's mouth. You don't get to die on me yet. You must also go through the humiliation of being called trash, Gustav voiced with a smirk as he brought out a rope and some other items. He tied Gordon up and also gagged him before placing him beside the wall. Now that he has lost his bloodline, he won't be able to escape from here until someone sees him, but by then it will be too late and it'll be done with Charles, Gustav said internally as his body slowly transformed into that of Gordon's. Hair color, eye size, skin tone, height, hair length, everything about Gordon's looks were perfectly copied. Gustav pulled off his clothes and changed into Gordon's school uniform. Since Gordon was taller and bigger than he was, wearing his regular school uniform wasn't an option. After Gustav was done, he walked out of the bathroom and placed the cleaning sign properly in front of the door. Those past events led to this moment where Gustav was about to take Charles' bloodline. From when Charles brought him to the bathroom, he already activated Dash and used his speed to throw Charles out of balance. He used Palm Strike repeatedly earlier to break through the gravitational force surrounding Charles' body upon activating his bloodline. Charles' downfall was already certain from when he was fooled by Gordon's appearance, which was actually Gustav. Gustav had taken him by surprise from the first attack, dealt a lot of damage. This wasn't like the training session in school, so he wasn't going to hold back when fighting Charles this time. Charles was pretty much stronger than the rest of the Zulu-ranked mixed bloods he had fought until now, but he still fell short of Gustav's prowess when he used his full strength. Gustav was still squatting at this moment. His nails still dug into Charles' neck. Requirement for bloodline acquisition has been met. Analyzing host compatibility with gravitational charge bloodline 0% per 100%. Analysis complete. 99. 9%/100%. Host compatibility with gravitational charge bloodline is 99. 9%. Does host desire to acquire this bloodline? Yes/no. Gustav stared at the notification with a look of amazement. Chapter 79. Does this mean I might be able to extract this bloodline without it being reduced in grade? Gustav wondered. He felt this was probably going to be the case and was eager to confirm it. Yes, he muttered with an intrigued look. Host has decided to acquire this bloodline. Bloodline extraction will now begin. Gustav saw the bar start to move after the notification appeared. He waited for about 5 minutes before notifications started popping up in his line of sight. Congratulations! Host has acquired gravitational charge bloodline. Monthly quest. Acquire a C-grade bloodline has been completed. Rewards. All stats +2. New attribute has been unlocked. Defense. 200,000 EXP. Host has leveled up. Host has leveled up. Host has leveled up. Notifications rang out repeatedly in his head. Originally, he would be feeling headache from hearing the sound of numerous notifications, but right now it was like music to his ears. He stared at the notifications and smirked. Now those are what I call rewards, Gustav voiced out in excitement. He brought out 2 pills from his pocket and placed them in Charles' mouth before tying him up and gagging him like Gordon. After Gustav was done, he looked around the bathroom and noticed it was in a messy state. He would have choked Charles like he did with Gordon, but it would only prolong the fight. If Charles were to activate his bloodline while Gustav was making contact with him, Gustav would get numbed temporarily. He already suspected that even with all the squeezing, or whatever he decided to try, Charles would still be able to activate his bloodline regardless, so he decided to go with a heavy beating. Gustav brought out a small black bottle and opened it. He moved around the scene and poured out the content in different spots. A bluish powdery substance poured out and spread across the surroundings. There was no difference between the state of the room earlier and now. Only Gustav knew the purpose of the powder since it didn't change anything in the atmosphere. After doing that, Gustav washed his hands at the faucet and put his looks in order before leaving the bathroom. He walked out of the room and arrived at the corridor that led to the stairs. His expression right now was that of a haughty young master, exactly how Gordon acted. While walking across the corridor, the guard that followed them here was coming from the opposite direction. He saw Gustav coming from the other side and bowed slightly. Gustav stared at him with disgust before speaking. Don't disturb Charles, he's busy right now. Young master, I can't do that, it's already late. His father will be expecting him, the guard answered. All right then, go. I wonder how Charles will deal with you after you disturb his pleasure time, Gustav said and kept walking forward. The guard's face paled as he heard that. Young master, what about you? Why are you not joining him? The guard turned around and asked. Because I'm done, you big oaf. I'm going to wait in the car. You better don't disturb him until he's done, Gustav said without turning around. He walked towards the stairways ahead and walked down the stairs. The guard kept staring in the direction where Gustav headed for a few seconds before gulping down spit and walking towards the room where everything went down. He got to the front of the door and reached out for the button that controlled the opening and shutting of the door. He stopped himself when his finger was only a few centimeters from touching the button. Let me wait for a few more minutes, he said and moved to the side of the entrance to stand. Gustav, who had already gotten to the elevator that led down, sighed in relief. A drop of sweat had already appeared on his forehead. That was an expert that is on the same level with the person who abducted me. Gustav cleaned the drop of sweat on his head as the elevator descended. Gustav wondered where Gordon and Charles got the guts to speak to him anyhow they willed. The way he spoke to the guard earlier was similar to Gordon's method of speaking. Disrespect, haughtiness, and lack of regard. Does this mean background matters more than power, or does power matter more? Gustav couldn't see someone as powerful as Miss Amy bowing to some group of brats as they trash-talked her. He knew the guard wasn't as powerful, but even with that, he didn't expect that someone at that level of strength would just choose to be a lackey. He couldn't wrap his head around it no matter how much he tried. He placed that behind him as the elevator reached the ground floor. The ground floor was always crowded due to it being accessible to everyone regardless of their status. Immediately, Gustav walked amidst the crowd of people. He transformed into a random person and left through the exit. An hour later, Gustav was in his bedroom reminiscing about today's event. It went just as planned, but it could have gone really bad had that guard decided to enter the room. I wonder if they'll attend school after all this. Probably not. Those bastards can't take the shame after all, but it doesn't change the fact that they'll be seen as trashes from now on, Gustav muttered with a look of gratification. He felt shapeshifting was really convenient for getting a lot of sneaky deeds done. His mind went back to how he started planning all this last week. Last week, he asked Boss Danzo about a recipe he could add to any meal that would cause severe diarrhea. Originally, this illness was something that could be fixed by downing a single healing pill, but Gustav asked Boss Danzo for specific recipes that would cause the illness to remain even after downing a bottle of healing pills. Boss Danzo asked what he needed that for, but Gustav answered that it was only for research. Boss Danzo gave him some concoctions that could be mixed to achieve that effect. After getting how to mix the concoctions, Gustav used them to prepare an odorless and tasteless oil. This morning he used that oil to cook a separate meal. Gustav had been able to access the second floor of the high school cafeteria since he started training with Miss Amy. There were times he would assist the chefs in serving food to the mixed bloods. He decided to do that again today and made use of the opportunity to serve Gordon that special food. Chapter 80. Gustav had been studying both of them for the past week. He knew Gordon's feeding timetable, so he was sure about the meal he was gonna get today. Of course, when Gordon and Charles came to buy their lunch together, they didn't forget to throw snide remarks at Gustav when they saw him selling food at the counter. Gustav knew that they would come to his side of the counter once they saw him, which was one of the reasons why he decided to help the chefs serve food today. This was what led to Gordon getting the special meal. Since then he had been having a runny stomach and had to visit the bathroom countless times. Gustav, who everyone thought would never attend the sparring sessions again, was always close by whenever it was going on. He had been watching them since after break. His plan paid off when Gordon ran to the toilet after the day ended. That was where his plan truly kicked off. The other time when he sparred with Charles and Gordon, he was inspecting their bloodline abilities on a closer scale. Charles especially, since Gustav wanted to find out if he could break through the gravity barrier that always surrounded him after he activated his bloodline. From when Gustav made contact with the gravity field that always surrounded Charles, he calculated the amount of force that would be needed to break through it, and he realized that Palm Strike's skill could achieve that. Gustav was glad that everything worked out as planned, and he had already put several things in place to make sure these deeds were not traced back to him. After contemplating about a few more things, Gustav opened the system interface to check his stats. Host attributes. Name. Gustav level. 8 class. EXP. 69 500/150 000 HP. 1250/1250 energy. 900/1000 attributes. Strength. 37 perception. 37 mental fortitude. 37 agility. 37 speed. 52 bravery, 37 intelligence, 37 charm, 37 defense, 5 attributes points, 19. Gustav stared at the new stat with a contemplative look. Defense? I'm guessing it might have to do with strengthening my body or something, he analyzed. It's too bad I spent most of my attributes points on the race with Angie, Gustav sighed in dissatisfaction. Add 5 points to defense, Gustav commanded. Plus 5 points have been added to defense. He only had 19 attributes points to spare at this moment. He always liked to save some in case of emergency, so he didn't add more to defense after this. He decided that he would use the daily stats to increase defense until it up to par with the rest. I wonder if my body is steadier now. Unlike the other stats, he could hardly feel any difference when he increased his defense stats. He decided he would try it out later. It was evening already, so it was time for his patrols. He suspected that a mixed breed would show up today, so he decided for Angie to skip today's patrol, so he would do it alone. The next day, Gustav woke up by his usual time and went to school. Last night, just as he expected, a mixed breed showed up, and it was a level 1 this time. It didn't take Gustav longer than a few minutes to kill it and add it to beast transformation. This happened to be a mutated ape mixed breed. It looked like a monkey with white furs, but it was as big as a gorilla. Its features were in its ability to corrode any object it touched. Gustav felt it wasn't needed since he already had atomic disintegration, but on second thought, he decided to extract it. He decided that the next mixed breed he considered useless would be sold to a lab without any extraction being performed on it. From the information, He gathered earlier mixed-breed corpses would sell for good prices in laboratories, but he never for once tried to do that. If the laboratory researches the corpses and found out that their bloodline was missing, it would arouse suspicions. Now that he could transform into anyone he willed, he could use a different character and form to do business with laboratories. Not a lot of facilities around this part of the city had see-through technology security protocols that could scan a person's internals, which could potentially put shape-shifting to shame. This was why Gustav wasn't worried about them noticing that he wasn't in his original form. Gustav walked to school after getting to the usual stopping point for him and Angie. School cafeteria during the break period. Gustav was sitting on the second floor taking his lunch. He always stays behind, so no one usually noticed that was there most of the time. Sometimes some of them would see him and not even recognize him. Chatter, chatter, chatter. The hall was noisier than usual today, with discussions coming from different angles. Just as Gustav expected, the news about what happened to Gordon and Charles had circulated. Hey, did you hear? Gordon and Charles lost their bloodlines? What? How did that happen? No one knows, but Charles said Gordon was responsible for the incident while Gordon said it was an unknown man. That doesn't make any sense. It can't be Gordon if he also lost his bloodline. Have you heard that something similar happened 2 months ago to Ben? What? Ben also lost his bloodline? Yes. The person said to be responsible was a terrorist mixed blood who was also accused of being the one responsible for putting Hung Jo in his current state. Ovalid is the only terrorist suspected in the meantime, but he never had any means of taking any mixed blood's bloodline before, so no one knows if it's all just a cover-up so the government can have someone to blame. Damn though. What is really happening? Is the city not safe anymore? More like what's happening in this school, since such unfortunate events has only happened to students that attend this school. Gustav listened from the side with a barely noticeable smile on his face. There's more to come. Chapter 81. There's more to come, but I should be cautious and keep it on the low for now. Gustav's thought process was like this because before did this no one was wary and everyone practically let their guards down. Now that it had become a hot topic, everyone was cautious now. No one wanted to be the next Gordon or Charles, so everyone was watching their backs. Gustav could tell that it wasn't going to be easy when next he decided to steal a student's bloodline now that things had developed to this state. He wasn't too bothered though, because aside from Hung Jo, Ben, Paul, Charles, and Gordon, there were only about 2 persons left that bullied him. Hung Jo was top of the list while the rest of these 2 left were at the bottom. The rest of his classmates only talked down on him and called him trash, so he wasn't really planning anything for them, but he had decided to face slap a lot of them in the MBO entrance test. Either way, he decided not to try anything intense like what he did the day before. Gustav finished his meal later and left the hall after exchanging greetings with some of the chefs. The latter half of the day was spent training Class 3 students again. The instructor was a little bit bothered about Gordon and Charles' situation, but it didn't affect his plans overall, since there were way more students that were better than both of them in Class 3. The students showed more of their prowess and potential so they could fill in the spot that Charles and Gordon occupied. Class 3 had over 100 students. Although everyone would be attending, everyone couldn't represent the school in duels. Charles happened to be picked as part of the duel team members while Gordon was picked as a substitute, which was why students were showing their prowess today. They wanted the 2 empty slots that were currently available. Also, those that planned to be picked as the captain of the team had to always show their prowess. It would still take some time before the instructor would pick a captain. The school practically ended noisily before everyone went to their houses. Another 3 days passed by, and it was Monday again. His weekend with Angie was a pretty interesting one since he was helping her push her speed to the limit by giving her some tasks during the night observation. Angie was starting to wonder if mixed breeds were avoiding her presence. She was always so happy when no mixed breed showed up. Gustav realized that she didn't want the neighborhood and him to be in any form of danger, but she had no idea that he was purposely making her come out to patrol with him on days when he was sure there'll be no mixed breed appearing. Gustav headed for school once again with her and arrived at school several minutes later. He was inside the kitchen cooking some meals when Boss Danzo asked to speak with him. Both of them went to the corridor to exchange conversation. "Hey lad, how have you been doing lately?" Boss Danzo asked with a worried tone. "I'm fine, boss. Why do you ask?" Gustav was a bit dumbfounded by the sudden question. I'm just concerned for your well-being is all, Boss Danzo replied. I understand, boss. So why did you want to see me? Gustav asked with an intrigued look. I just want to give you a piece of advice. It's up to you to listen, Boss Danzo spoke. I know you've been wronged by lots of people, your family, your peers, and practically the society, but son, I've noticed you're getting more colder and colder by the day. I don't want you to become like the people you hate. Boss Danzo added. Now I'm not telling you to like them or forgive them. I'm just saying don't be like them. Be better. If you plan to take revenge on them in the future or anything, don't involve the innocent, Boss Danzo stated. Gustav nodded with a look of understanding. Of course, Boss Danzo. I won't become like those rotten people. I have my own way of doing things is all, Gustav replied. Good, very good. Gustav, do you know who a true man is? Boss Danzo asked. Gustav had an intrigued look on his face after hearing that question. He didn't want to end up saying something dumb, so he asked, who is a true man? A true man is one with principles that forbid him from turning a blind eye to someone being inflicted with the pain he has gone through, Boss Danzo stated. Gustav had a contemplative look on his face after hearing that explanation. Gustav, are you a true man? Do you have such principles or a similar principle? Boss Danzo asked with a profound gaze. Gustav stood there speechless. He didn't know how to reply. Now mind you, my boy, I'm not asking you to become a hero. Becoming a hero in this vast world is not only useless but will also bring about your death. I'm only telling you not to turn a blind eye to something you know you can truly change. If you see a person is being inflicted with the same pain you went through, and you have the ability to put an end to it, don't turn a blind eye. You don't have to be a hero, but being numb to wicked deeds and the likes of those who are a nuisance to the community makes you no different from the people you hate. Boss Danzo patted Gustav's shoulder after speaking and turned around to leave. As Boss Danzo walked 2 steps forward, Gustav spoke, causing him to pause. Boss Danzo, why should I care about being a monster when no one gives a damn about turning me into one? Why won't I turn my back on the world when it turned its back on me? Why would I bother trying to save people that I believe? If we're in my shoes today, wouldn't bother trying to save me when I'm in trouble? Why would a selfish world such as this deserve even an iota of my mercy? Gustav asked in successions while staring at the floor. In his eyes, only sorrow could be seen. Chapter 82. This topic seemed to have opened a lot of scars for him. Good questions, my boy. The answer is something that I'm sure you know deep down but don't want to admit it, Boss Danzo stated while turning around to face Gustav again. Which is? Gustav asked. There are people who are actually decent in this world, Boss Danzo replied. And those kinds of people are the type that deserves your mercy since they've never hurt anyone. Boss Danzo turned around once again and went in, leaving Gustav to wallow in his thoughts. Even when the day ended, Gustav couldn't stop thinking about what Boss Danzo said. Maybe he was truly turning a blind eye as he got more powerful. If Boss Danzo had told him to become a hero outright, he would have turned him down instantly, but the way he spoke made a lot of sense to Gustav. I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. I know for a fact that I haven't harmed anyone who didn't deserve it. Gustav stopped the internal battle going on within his mind with this. Everyone left for home after school came to an end for the day. Gustav also left for home since today was a free day for him. Miss Amy wouldn't be training him today. Although he could still go to the dojo and do self-training, only one thought was in his mind right now, and that was to try out recreation. The only problem was he hadn't decided on the bloodlines he would combine. Beast transformation was still a no, along with atomic manipulation. He didn't know if he would be able to use them separately after the transformation. Same with his genetic transformation bloodline. The two he could use in performing the experiment were the ones he extracted from Gordon and Charles. The reason Gustav was feeling reluctant about he liked Charles' bloodline and what it could do. He didn't want to use recreation on it, but there was no other bloodline he could use, so he had to come to terms with it. When he thought about it more, he realized that this was a better option, since he wouldn't be able to use the abilities in public places. If he did, they would be recognized, but with recreation, they could turn out to be something different when mixed, and no one would be able to recognize the abilities. Gustav got home later and sat on his bed to test it out. Now that I think about it, will recreation work without the need for requirements like the bloodline acquisition? Gustav wondered. But after thinking about it for a while, he decided trying it out would be the best way to know. Activate recreation, Gustav said internally. Recreation has been activated. Gustav felt hot on the inside all of a sudden. Wow, what's that? He wondered. He could feel the bloodlines around the channel points bubbling with intensity. Which bloodlines does host wish to combine? The system asked. Combine gravitational charge and energy transmutation bloodline, Gustav commanded internally. Host has decided to combine gravitational charge and energy transmutation bloodline. Gravitational charge plus energy transmutation. Calculating compatibility rate, 0%. Calculating compatibility rate, 17%. Calculating compatibility rate, 37%. Gustav watched as the system calculated the compatibility rate. In a few seconds, it was done. Compatibility of combination is 58%. Does host still wish to combine both bloodlines? Yes/no. Gustav was about to say yes when a warning notification popped up. Warning. Combining these bloodlines might create a bloodline that will be dangerous to others as well as the host. Gustav read the warning notification with a look of amazement. This can only mean two things. First, the bloodline created from the combination of both bloodlines will be powerful. Second, it will be so powerful and hard to control that I may harm others and myself with it if I'm not able to control it, Gustav analyzed. Surprisingly, he looked quite excited instead of looking disturbed. Now I'm looking forward to this even more, Gustav said inwardly before giving the system his answer. Yes, combine the bloodlines. Combining energy transmutation and gravity charge. Gustav suddenly felt a cool and soothing feeling welling up from within. Recalibrating bloodlines to their initial genetic form, mixing endoplasm, antimycogen, cellulose. Different notifications begin to pop up in his line of sight as Gustav felt his body undergo different kinds of internal changes. Combination process will begin. Combination procedure, 0.01%/100%. Gustav watched as the percentage moved up slowly. Combination procedure, 0.19%/100%. Even after 2 hours, it was still at 0.19. Gustav's mouth was slightly opened in frustration. At this stage, it will take at least 2 days, Gustav sighed internally. He thought it would be fast like bloodline acquisition, but he was wrong. Recreation didn't have requirements like bloodline acquisition, but the process was really slow. It was time for Gustav to go do his usual night routine. He didn't know if his movement would affect the combination, but he had to move, or hell cancel the combination entirely. Gustav stood up and went to change his clothes. The soothing feeling he was getting from the combination came occasionally, but he was able to ignore it and move. The soothing feeling always made him want to lie down and relish the enjoyment coming from within, but at the moment he had to block the feeling from affecting his movement. Gustav went out for neighborhood inspection after a while with Angie. He arrived back at midnight, and just as expected, no mixed breed showed today. The only reason why Gustav was feeling disappointed was because of the notification that was still displayed in his line of sight. Combination procedure, 12.7%/100%. This is gonna take a while, Gustav said internally. This meant he would have to go to school the next day. This way, Gustav went to school the next day with the combination still in process. Sometimes the soothing feeling would be so good that Gustav would have the urge to moan, but he would hold it in. If he suddenly started moaning in classes, people would think he had gone from being trashed to being possessed. He wasn't really bothered by his classmates' thoughts about him right now, but he would prefer not to add more to the weird list. Chapter 83. Gustav checked the percentage of the combination procedure almost every hour in school. It was still moving as slow as ever. Even after the entire day had passed, the procedure was not still completed. While he was training with Miss Amy, she noticed his weird state and asked if all was well. Of course, Gustav replied that everything was all right. Sometimes he would get a soothing feeling that caused his actions to delay. Even though it was only for a split second, Miss Amy would notice it because Gustav hardly paused for a millisecond during a battle. His brain was always in full mode thinking and plotting. Before his first attack has landed, he was already preparing for the second and third, but this time it wasn't quite so. He already decided that the next time he was going to try out recreation, He would lock himself indoors until it was done combining the two bloodlines. Miss Amy could see Gustav staring into thin air sometimes, which gave her a weird feeling, but since he said he was okay, she decided not to pursue it. After their training ended for the day, Gustav went home immediately. He didn't want to stick around to embarrass himself by mistake or something. He got home and sat on his bed. He distributed today's points from completing daily tasks first. He placed everything in defense since he wanted to raise it as high as the rest. Add 5 points to defense. Plus 5 points has been added to defense. Gustav was finally starting to sense a little bit of change in his body after defense reached 15 points. He would have loved to test it out, but at the moment there was nothing he could use to test out his defense, and he was more worried about recreation right now. He decided to check the progress again. Combination procedure, 57. 89%/100%. Gustav lied on his bed in frustration after seeing the progress. He knew it would still take till the end of the next day before it would be done. Gustav was thinking about staying indoors the next day, but he decided not to because of his training with Miss Amy. He only trained with her 3 days of the week now, so he didn't want to miss any days. Gustav. The night quickly passed once again, and the next day came. Gustav was feeling excited when he woke up because he was sure the combination would be finished today. He checked the progress once again. Combination procedure, 78. 57%/100%. He got prepared to leave home for school. After Gustav got to school, he started feeling a kind of hotness from within. Gustav hissed in pain as he felt his blood bubbling again. Combination procedure, 80%/100%. He noticed it was at 80%, which meant it was closer to completion. He guessed that this was the reason for the burning feeling within. After a while, the hot feeling was replaced by the refreshing feeling again. Gustav was already starting to regret coming to school because when the feeling of hotness came, he was forced to stop his steps. Also, he noticed something around his pants area that he never thought would be possible for him to develop right now. He walked to the kitchen and asked Boss Danzo for a break today. This came as a surprise to Boss Danzo, and he asked if Gustav was all right. Gustav only told him he needed to rest, and Boss Danzo gave his consent. Gustav went to class and sat there alone. It was still very early in the morning, so there was not a single student to be seen in the class. Gustav just sat there trying to calm his urges till students began to stream into the class. The first two who arrived were surprised to see him in class by that time. Unlike before where they might have uttered snide remarks, they ignored him and went to their seats. When the class became filled, discussions of the upcoming exchange event could be heard again. Gustav just blocked his mind from the class and focused on calming himself. Throughout the day, he was absent-minded. He later went to the dojo to train with Miss Amy after the day had ended. Pa, 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 pa. Miss Amy was currently using a long staff-like weapon to spar with Gustav. Gustav was holding onto a red weapon that was a mixture of a gun and a broadsword. He rotated 3 times, slamming the sharp part of the weapon onto the staff on Miss Amy's hand. Miss Amy used the lower part of the staff to slap Gustav's weapon towards the side before rotating the staff and slamming the tip on his head twice. Bang! Bam! Gustav fell to the floor after taking that hit. He laid down like a log of wood and breathed in and out profusely. He stayed in that position for a while. What's wrong with you lately? Miss Amy asked with a look of worry. I'm fine, Gustav said and got back up. Let's get back to. Before Gustav completed his statement, he suddenly felt hotness welling up underneath his gut. Gustav exclaimed with a look of discomfort. Are you all right? Miss Amy asked as she noticed sweat forming on Gustav's face. I'm fine, Gustav muttered again as he felt the hotness being subdued and being replaced with a feeling of intense coolness. He sighed in relief and stared at Miss Amy. I'm fine, he said once again, only for him to notice that Miss Amy's eyes weren't on him instead. Her eyes were focused on a certain part of his body. Oh, I see why you've been spacing out lately. Going through puberty yet? Miss Amy voiced out with a smirk while staring at Gustav's lower half. Gustav followed her line of sight down and stared at himself. His eyes widened as he saw the huge bulge protruding in between his upper thighs. The bulge was so huge that the yukata he was putting on couldn't hide its liveliness. Gustav quickly turned around, and with a look of embarrassment, and used his hands to cover his privates. It seems to have grown bigger since the last time I saw it. So much life and vigor. I wonder if you've been thinking of doing that with a girl lately? Anyways, congratulations. You've gone from having a thumb to a... Before Miss Amy could complete her statement, Gustav interrupted her. Miss Amy, why in the hell are you staring? Gustav voiced out in dissatisfaction. You pointed it at me like a gun. Of course, they'll stare at it, Miss Amy said with a burst of playful laughter. Chapter 84. Gustav felt like entering into a hole to hide at this moment. His face had become slightly red. Damn recreation. How could you embarrass me like this? Gustav still used his palms to cover up his bulge. The bulge was still as strong as ever, and it didn't seem like it would be coming down soon. Excuse me, Miss Amy, Gustav said and ran towards one of the rooms. Miss Amy smiled playfully before answering. You're free to go masturbate for a few minutes. Just make sure you clean up properly. Gustav, who had entered the room, heard that and nearly tripped over himself. He moved towards the bathroom and locked himself in. He sat on the toilet seat in front and checked the progress of the combination. Combination procedure, 99. 89%/100%. Gustav felt the bulge earlier was because the combination was almost done. Only a few more to go. Gustav decided to wait for it to finish combining before deciding to leave the room. Even with the low amount left, almost an hour went by before Gustav finally saw the notification appear in his line of sight. Recreation successful? The feeling of discomfort mixed with comfort finally disappeared, and Gustav could no longer sense both bloodlines within his body. He could only sense one right now. Energy transmutation and gravity charge bloodline have been successfully mixed. A B-grade bloodline has been created. Gustav felt like his eyes were deceiving him. B-grade bloodline? He muttered softly with a surprised look. He stared at the new notification that appeared, which displayed the name, as well as the ability of the new bloodline. Wow, Gustav exclaimed in surprise after reading what the bloodline could do. 2 weeks later. 2 weeks had gone by in a flash. During these 2 weeks, Gustav had spent the time training, and he had also killed 2 mixed breeds in the past 2 weeks. His defense now had the same amount of points as the rest of his attributes. He had also been learning how to make use of his new bloodline, but he was still lacking in controlling it. Gustav wore a red leather jacket and pants that were tight-fitted, making him look athletic. He was heading to school at this moment. He wasn't the only one headed to school like this. Other students also had red leather jackets and pants on. An insignia of their school was placed on the right breast pocket area. Immediately Gustav got to school, he noticed that everywhere was bustling with life. It was still 6 a.m. in the morning, so this was a pretty abnormal time for students to be in school, but it was finally time for the exchange event to take place. The students streaming into the school were students of Class 3. They all had excited looks on their faces as they headed towards the school hall where the principal would brief them before they were asked to board the bus. It looked as if they weren't traveling anywhere since they weren't packing any pieces of luggage, but the students of Class 3 had packed their luggage and all their necessities inside their storage device. No one would need to carry pieces of luggage when traveling since storage devices were available. The principal briefed them in that hall about the rules and what they would be experiencing over there. How they had to be respectful, which Gustav called bullshit internally. He talked for about 5 minutes more before leaving the podium and telling the students to head towards the bus. 3 big violet-colored buses floating above the ground were waiting for them in the parking lot. All the teachers were allowed to come with them, but some of them decided to stay back. Miss Amy included. She already told Gustav beforehand that she wouldn't be attending, so he had to be careful in Atrahea City, which according to her, wasn't as safe as Plankton City. The students went into the buses one after the other. Each bus was big enough to contain up to 40 people, and there were a little over 100 students in Class 3, so the buses were enough to contain everyone. Even when Gustav entered, he was still thinking about the neighborhood. He killed a mixed breed last night, which meant mixed breeds were unlikely to appear again until after a week. The exchange event was only 3 days, so he had enough time, but he was still worried. He kept thinking, what if another mixed breed attacks the neighborhood while I'm gone? Gustav was only traveling with them because he wanted to cross the border and inspect it on a closer scale. He didn't even want to stay there for more than a day after crossing the border, but no one was allowed to leave until the exchange event was over. Gustav sat at the back inside the bus, beside the window, and brought out a headphone. He wasn't privileged to have this before, but now he would listen to music as they traveled, even though he knew traveling wouldn't take long due to speed. Besides him was a girl with white hair who occasionally stole glances at him from the side, but he wasn't paying attention to anyone on the bus. The bus engine finally started, and then it zoomed off. Zwarnen. Just as Gustav expected, when the bus arrived outside the school premises, it turned towards the road that led to his apartment area. The bus streamed across the road in midair. There was a large teleportation ring ahead which it drove into. Zwii. They were in a world of blue and black for a few seconds before an opening appeared in front of their bus. Zoom. The bus entered the opening, and they arrived at the edge of the city where Gustav's neighborhood was located. He wasn't surprised since this was the closest route to get to Atrahia City. He already did his research earlier. The bus kept moving forward. It passed through the road that led to the middle of the forest region behind. In a few seconds, they were already transversing across the road in between the sparse forest region. Gustav could already see the border up ahead. The familiar blue and green glowing lines on both sides of the road could be seen. Normally, Gustav was always on the left side of the sparse forest region. He never went to the right, but now he could both sides. The bus kept driving and was closing in on the barricaded route up ahead. Once it crossed the next 3,000 meters, it would finally be in between the barricaded borders which were on the right and left side of the road. Zoom. It only took a few seconds for the bus to arrive in between. The students could no longer see the forest areas on the left and right. Only glowing walls in form of blue and green lines could be seen. The walls were thousands of meters tall and very long, so that was all they could see for miles. A notification popped up in Gustav's line of sight. Immediately the bus arrived in between the barricaded borders. Energy installment has been activated. Chapter 85. Energy installment has been activated. What? Gustav stared at the notification with a look of panic. The green and blue lines barricading the road on both sides suddenly started to twitch and blink. At first, it was barely noticeable before the lines started blinking repeatedly and swaying, before extending towards their bus. Gasp. Dash, is it supposed to do that? Dash, why does it look like it's getting closer? Dash, it's moving? Dasha, it's coming? There was panic in the bus as everyone noticed that the barricaded glowing lines on both sides started pulling towards them like it was elastic. The lines were causing the space within the road to reduce. The barricaded lines were boxing them in. Even the teachers on the buses couldn't understand. They were trying to make sense of what was happening. Why is the barrier moving towards our bus? These were the thoughts on their minds. Gustav's face was twisting in discomfort as the lines kept extending towards their bus. Everyone knew what would happen if it made contact. Their bus was likely to turn into ashes due to the intense amount of energy radiating from the lines converging towards. Dash, we're gonna die. Ruckus. 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 Chaos erupted in the bus as some of the students started screaming out in fear. Everyone calmed down. One of the teachers in front shouted out. They also couldn't understand why this was happening, but they still tried calming the students down. All of a sudden, the lines stopped extending towards them. They suddenly started to retract before completely moving back to their initial position. The teachers sighed in relief as the bus quieted down after seeing that happen. They were about to make a move if the lines came any closer. The teachers assured the students again that they were safe, and a test was probably going on, which was the reason for this. The bus went back to its liveliness after a while, and what happened here was quickly forgotten. At the back left corner, Gustav had sweat running down his forehead, even though the temperature in the bus was well-conditioned. He sighed in relief as he stared at the notification that appeared in his line of sight. Energy installment has been deactivated. Excess energy accumulated disappeared. Good thing I was able to stop it this time. It didn't even allow me to control the amount that is being gathered. I would have surely exploded to pieces. Gustav was internally grateful that he was able to stop the ability before the lines made contact with the bus. Even though what happened a while ago was very dangerous, it also made him inspect the border on a closer scale. It was just as he suspected. The border was made from energy crystals. He remembered the dangerous force he sensed within the underground facility was similar to this, but not as unstable. He felt that this was related to the fact that the dangerous force was energy crystals being mixed. The other difference was, he felt a certain kind of resonance with a particular bloodline inside his body. Beast transformation bloodline. Even with the fast speed of the bus, traveling through the middle of the border took up to 2 hours. It was more than 3,000 miles after all. When they were getting to the end, they could see the road ahead blocked completely by the red and blue lines. They could also see men in armor-like outfits standing there. A small building was also constructed. The men in armor-like uniforms inspected the bus with a triangular machine that was more than 2 meters tall. It scanned the bus with blue rays of light before an opening was created within the lines-like barrier which the bus drove through. After driving through the opening, they had arrived in front of a long and wide bridge. The forest and the first border were behind them, while in front of them was the large bridge which had a body of water underneath it. There was a spatial ring on the bridge which the bus drove into. Since the incident passed, Gustav had been listening to music and looking through the window to check the environment. Zoom! The bus entered into the spatial ring and arrived on a road in the middle of plain fields. There was nothing to be seen on both sides for miles. Ahead, a huge sign could be seen. Welcome to Atrahia City. It was floating in midair ahead. Some blue-like flames were responsible for suspending it in midair. They could finally see the big city up ahead. From what they could see, the structures were similar to that of Plankton City. They passed through the city checkpoints after some procedures and were now driving through the city. Gustav was surprised that, unlike Plankton City, there was no border preventing mixed breeds from coming in, which had him wondering how they prevented mixed breeds from coming in because, since they arrived in the city, not a single one could be spotted. If they weren't using a border to block mixed breeds, shouldn't the city be full of them? Another thing was he couldn't see the teleportation circles that existed in Plankton City here. There were structures on the roads constructed for easy movement of pedestrians. There were several differences between Plankton City and Atrahia City. Atrahia City seemed less advanced in technology. Some of the things he could see as they traveled across the road were floating structures. There was a particular building they passed through that was actually floating across the surface of the ground. He suspected that this was a normal thing around here, and he wasn't wrong. Plankton City specialized in spatial constructions and some other things, while Atrahia specialized in flights and spacecrafts. According to their history, they could make anything fly, including a house. A house could be turned into a jet. Something could be seen in the skies, positioned in the middle of the city. They had no idea what it was due to its distance from the ground, but they noticed that it looked like a spaceship. After the bus traveled for some minutes, turning left and right repeatedly, they could see a 300-story building that was looking extremely luxurious. The glass panes of the building were so smooth and shiny that it could be mistaken for a body of clean water. This particular area was bustling with activity. People moved to and fro across the area. People in luxurious outfits could be seen streaming into the vicinity. In front of the vicinity, which was barricaded, a sign could be seen that said, Atrahia Lodgings and Resorts. After the bus received clearance, it was allowed to drive in. What appeared in their line of sight once they arrived inside was a neat and beautiful environment. There were small houses located in several parts and a water body that was similar to a beach positioned on the west. The bus dropped the students in the parking lot, and the teachers asked everyone to follow them after they got down. Chapter 86. The other buses also arrived, and everyone got down and followed the teachers and principal. The people within the environment stared at the hundreds of students with a look of astonishment. They gave off a particular kind of lively vibe with the red outfit they were clad in. From their young faces, they could already tell that these were students. The students walked towards the large 300-story building up ahead. Once they got to the front, a man and young lady clad in business outfits came out of the building to receive them. "Ah, Mr. Irwin, welcome to Atrahia City." The man walked towards Echelon Academy principal, who was a bald man. They shook hands and exchanged pleasantries. The man also greeted the rest of the teachers and waved to the students before they walked into the building. The interiors were very beautiful and neat-looking. The ground floor was designed to look like they were in a garden of different types of flowers. These were actually projections coming from the walls and floors. It wasn't actually a garden. A feminine statue made of ice block could be seen in the middle. It was oozing so much coldness from the looks of things, but the environment was warm. Beautiful ladies in pink robes could be seen moving about the place. They were workers here. The environment gave off a soothing vibe. The students were lodged in at the reception area before they were taken to the 234th floor. Male and female students were not allowed to stay together, so the floor was divided into two. The first half was given to boys, and the second half were given to girls. 5 students would occupy a single room. The rooms were shared, and Gustav happened to be in room 786C along with 4 other male students, of course. Gustav was given the key to the room, and the 4 followed behind him. 2 of them with unwilling faces, while the other 2 weren't bothered. Why did the principal give this trash the key? One of them couldn't just help but voice out with dissatisfaction. Idiots will always complain over every single thing, Gustav muttered with an unbothered expression. The student who spoke earlier was a boy with dark green hair. When he heard Gustav say that, his face twisted in annoyance, but before he could retort, the other student beside him tapped him and gave him an eye signal. He decided to keep quiet after receiving the signal. They got to their room, which was big and luxurious enough to contain even 10 people if they wanted. 5 beds were placed in 5 separate spots, 2 on the left and 3 on the right. The walls were practically screens as they displayed different kinds of digital images. The room had a balcony up ahead that was very wide. Gustav picked the bed closest to the door, which happened to be on the left side, and brought out his luggage from his storage device. He placed his bag on the bed and turned around to leave the room. The students have been told to head to the multipurpose hall 2 hours from now. According to their principal, other school students would also be there, and Atrahia City High School principal would be addressing everyone. It was still around 8 a.m. Gustav wanted to familiarize himself with the environment for the next 2 hours. It was his first time visiting another city after all. If he had a guide, he would even leave the hotel to see other places, but he didn't, so he still had to stay within the vicinity. There were different places within the hotel. One of the places Gustav visited first was the mountain forest side, which was said to contain exotic and rare animals. Gustav wanted to use this as a form of research since it was hard to see normal animals nowadays. Almost all the life forms on Earth had mutated. The combination of Slarkovs and humans was also a kind of mutation. He wasn't the only one moving around the vicinity during this time. Some other students decided to check out the environment too. The forest area was a kind of highland located on the east side of the hotel environs. Gustav went together with a group, because according to the protocols of the place, moving alone around there wasn't allowed. Almost 2 hours later, Gustav was returning to his room on the 234th floor. Elephants, tigers, baboons, chimpanzees, squirrel. So more creatures existed outside of mixed breeds. Gustav muttered softly with a contemplative look as he stood within the elevator. He had seen different kinds of creatures today, and he was surprised to find out that more normal animals existed. He thought every creature besides humans, Slarkovs, mixed bloods, birds, and a few other normal animals that he had seen before would be mixed breeds. One couldn't find these animals in Plankton City. That was the reason for his surprise. He got out of the elevator and walked to his room. Room 786C was the 23rd room on the left side within the corridor. Gustav arrived before his room and used the facial recognition registered there, after their entry earlier, to gain access. He walked into the room, which was noisy earlier, but quieted down upon his arrival. He stared at his bed and noticed someone lying on it. "Where's my luggage?" Gustav asked with a cool gaze. The person lying on his bed was the same student who was dissatisfied with the principal giving Gustav the key. The boy with the green hair was named Wally. "Why don't you look over there?" Wally pointed at the balcony area. Gustav followed his line of sight and noticed his rectangular luggage sitting there. "And why are you on my bed?" Gustav asked another question. "Haha, because this bed is mine now," Wally voiced out with a burst of light laughter. The rest of the students were also in their beds. The bed beside the one Gustav picked was occupied by Wally's friend, while the 2 on the right were occupied by the other 2. The only other bed available was the one closest to the balcony. "Oh, I see," Gustav said with a smirk and turned around. He moved to the door and used the key to lock it so no one would be able to leave even if they tried to use facial recognition. Click. The clicking of the door was heard. Gustav turned around after he finished locking the door. "Why are you locking the door?" Wally asked. Chapter 87. Why are you locking the door? Wally asked with a look of suspicion. Gustav didn't reply to him. After he locked the door, he turned around and started walking towards Wally. "Why are you folding your sleeves?" Wally asked another question. "So I won't get blood on them," Gustav answered while walking towards Wally and folding both his sleeves. Wally was still looking confused, but before he could think any further, Gustav had arrived in front of him. "Hey, trash, if you think." Before he could complete his sentence, Gustav swung his fist towards Wally's left cheek. Bang! The force of the punch sent Wally Botus towards the side. Bam! His face slammed into the wall and blood started trickling down his forehead. Gustav didn't even wait for a second more before sending another punch towards his face. Bang! The fist slammed into his left cheek again, sending him crashing towards the wall once again. Bam! The right side of his face slammed into the wall, causing him to tilt towards the left side after contact was made. Bang! Bam! Bang! Bam! Bang! Bam! Bang! It became like a game of tennis as Gustav kept punching Wally's face towards the wall, causing the same action to repeat itself numerous times. The other boys in the room had their mouths wide open in shock as they watched Wally continuously receiving numerous punches. They couldn't fathom what was happening right now. Isn't he said to be trash? Why is Wally receiving such a beating and not fighting back? They had such questions running through their minds as they stared at the unbelievable scene. Currently, Wally's left cheek was very swollen and red like a huge boil, while the right side of his face had blood trickling down. There was a huge swell on his forehead and eye. Even with all this, Gustav didn't stop. He kept punching Wally's face, causing his head to slam onto the wall, then bounce back to him before receiving another. "If you're not beaten up, you won't receive sense," Gustav voiced out as his fist kept swinging out like lightning. It wasn't that Wally didn't want to fight back. Instead, he couldn't. He hadn't even been allowed to complete a thought since Gustav's fist started raining upon his face. He was helpless and defenseless like a chicken before Gustav. "You bastard trash, what are you doing to Wally?" Wally's friend, who occupied the bed in front, lunged towards Gustav. His arm turned into a blade, and he stabbed it forward at Gustav. Gustav, who was still punching Wally, suddenly swerved to the side, dodging the blade smoothly. While Wally's friend was still moving across the air, Gustav swung his palm towards his cheek. Pa! A hot slap reverberated across the place as the boy slammed his forehead onto the floor after receiving the heavy slap from Gustav. Bang! Immediately, Wally's friend's head hit the floor. Gustav swung his foot at his face. Bam! His foot slammed into the boy's face, catapulting him towards the wall. Gustav stretched out his leg and slammed the boy's face into the wall again with his foot. Blam! 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 He stomped on his face repeatedly before placing his foot down. The boy had already passed out from the intense and multiple kicks. Gustav turned around to face Wally, who was currently laying on the ground. He grabbed onto Wally's head with his right hand and lifted him again. Wally's eyes were still rotating due to the intense punching session he received earlier, so he hadn't come back to his senses. Pa! Gustav gave him another slap to the face. Kyer! He screamed out as his swollen cheek busted with blood splattering across the place. "For placing your stinking body on my bed. I should at least break a few bones, don't you think?" Gustav voiced out as he grabbed Wally's left arm. Wally, who was still screaming in pain, tried yanking his hand back, but it was of no use. He couldn't contend with Gustav in terms of strength. Gustav clenched tightly onto Wally's wrist and twisted it. Krryykkk. A loud sound of bones breaking could be heard as Wally's right arm was twisted anti-clockwise. Kyer! He screamed out again. Gustav grabbed his fingers. "We're not done yet," he muttered with a smirk. Pop! 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 The sounds of bone popping reverberated across the room. Wally's fingers had been broken. They were bent completely to the back. Gustav. One of the boys on the other bed called out with a look of fright. What is it?" Gustav asked with an intense glare. Do you intend to partake in his suffering? He asked. The boy had his mouth wide open, and all the words that he wanted to say initially got stuck in his throat. I can assure you that if you plan on assisting them, you will suffer the same fate. If you think it's a bluff, stand up from your bed, Gustav warned with a smirk. The boy shut his mouth after hearing that and sat on his bed properly without the intention of standing up. Based on what he had seen here, he knew that he had no chance against Gustav. Also, he felt Wally brought this upon himself, so why would he join him to partake of his suffering? Even though he didn't completely agree with what was going on, he decided to sit down silently and watch, same as the other boy. That's for the left arm, now let's move to the right. Gustav brought his focus back on Wally, who was still whimpering in pain. Wally stared at Gustav with a look of unwillingness as he tried wrestling himself out of Gustav's grip again, but it was of no use. Gustav held Wally up with his right hand now and used his left hand to clench Wally's left arm. KRRYYKK. Another round of screaming started again. Several minutes later, Wally was on hanging from the ceiling with a rope. His hands were tied behind his back, and as his body loosely hung above the ground. His clothes were pulled off, and he was currently wearing white panties. There were red marks all over his body, and his expression depicted that he had gone through hell. Even if he wanted to use his bloodline at this moment, he couldn't due to the beating he had received. Also, it would be pointless since he would just be beaten to submission again. Wally's eyes slightly opened wider, and he stared at Gustav like he was looking at a demon. Now, do you still want my bed? Gustav stared into his dim eyes and asked with a threatening gaze. No, PPLSA LUTMEGO, Wally begged. All right, they'll let you go, but you have to understand that my service isn't free, Gustav said with a smile. Service? Wally questioned with a look of confusion. Yes, service. I spent more than 30 minutes teaching you manners. Do you think I wouldn't receive payment for that? Gustav said with a solemn look. Wally felt like he was going to pass out again from hearing Gustav's words. This is the most shameless bullying I have ever seen. He felt just Gustav's words were enough to anger even the devil. Come on, don't waste my time, Gustav voiced out again. Ho W mu ch? Wally forced this question out of his mouth. Not very expensive, 20,000 rad should do, Gustav replied. Ak, 20 thou sandrad? Wally felt like he didn't hear properly. Are you going to pay, or what? Mind you, I have a recording of you hanging from the ceiling, Gustav whispered into the ears of Wally, whose eyes widened upon hearing that. If you want, I can post it on the net. I'm sure you'll get lots of views and likes, Gustav said and turned around. I agree. I just need to transfer it to you. Wally quickly shouted out to stop Gustav from walking away. Ah, you've made me spend too much time in trying to convince you. The price has gone up to 30,000 now, Gustav said while shrugging. Wally nearly had a mental breakdown upon hearing that. But, before he could complete his sentence, Gustav cut him short. If you keep arguing, the price will keep increasing. Are you sure you want that? Wally quickly stopped arguing and agreed to the new price again. Gustav nodded and let him down. The transaction was done and Gustav had gained another 30,000 rad. Gustav allowed Wally and his friend Doger to use healing pills. By the way, you all are free to tell everyone what happened here. It's not like they'll believe you anyways. Gustav laughed lightly and stepped out of the room. It was already time for students to gather in the multipurpose hall. Every floor was very large, so each one had a hall, but this floor's hall wasn't the one that was going to be used. They would be using the hall that was located on the 100th and 50th floor, which was where Gustav was headed right now. He already left the boys in the room to their thoughts. He wasn't bothered because he knew they wouldn't even have the guts to mention what happened there, in the public. While heading there, Gustav saw a notification appear in his line of sight once again. Hidden quest complete. Chapter 88. Hidden quest completed. Dominate your roommates. Rewards, plus 10,000 EXP. Plus 5 extra attributes points. Gustav smiled as he traveled towards the hall. Looks like dealing with idiots always comes with rewards. Inside a large and luxurious-looking hall, teenagers in different outfits could be seen streaming in. They moved in groups as they walked into the hall. Those wearing the same color of outfits were moving in together. These were students from different schools in nearby cities that were also invited to participate in the exchange event. Students from the same schools sat around one another, so it was like a bundle of colors packed together, making the hall look a certain kind of unique way. Gustav sat amongst this large crowd, of course. The principal of Atrahia City High School walked to the podium to address the students. He first welcomed them to the Atrahia City and proceeded to explain how the event was going to be for the next 3 days. The students from other schools were going to tour the city and also tour Atrahia City High School the next day. The day after, they were going to be exchanging knowledge on different subjects and topics. Although it was called exchange of knowledge, in reality, it was actually a quiz based on the knowledge and intelligence of the students. Calling it an exchange was a way of covering up the true meaning. The third day, which was the final day, was when the duels were going to take place. The students were pretty much very excited to hear about all this, but they didn't expect that there would be also exchanging knowledge. Which students can I pick to represent us in the exchange of knowledge? Principal Irwin, who was seated behind the podium, along with other dignitaries, was thinking hard about this. The truth was, when it came to knowledge on normal subjects, the mixed blood students of Echelon Academy in Class 3 weren't very good at this. Unfortunately, no Slarkovs or human came with them. Only mixed bloods from Class 3 attended this exchange event. Most of these mixed bloods only cared about how to increase their strength and were hardly concerned with studying. Obviously, Principal Irwin didn't think that something like this would happen. If he did, he would have brought along students that weren't only muscle-brained. The principal of Atrahia City High School kept speaking about some other things for a few minutes before leaving the podium. A round of applause resounded as he walked back to his seat. The vice principal came on the stage and announced the names of the schools participating in the exchange event. There were up to 12 schools participating in the event. 2 happened to come from Plankton City, which was Echelon Academy, and Black Rock schools. The rest of the schools were Cheryl High, Brer Bullet High, Eagle Wings High, Reflection Academy, Mount Eve High, etc. All of these schools were from neighboring cities. There were about 1,000 students present in the hall at this moment. After the vice principal finished announcing the list of schools participating in the event, he mentioned the time that students were supposed to gather for the tour and how they were going to be grouped. Since they wanted students from other schools to mingle with one another, they decided that students from different schools would be grouped together. Gustav just listened from his current position while yawning occasionally. He wasn't even interested in the exchange event anymore. He wasn't only a bit interested in seeing different parts of the city. After a few more minutes, the meeting ended and students were permitted to return to their rooms. Of course, they were also free to wander around the vicinity. The students left the hall in droves. Gustav was walking within the large crowd when he heard his name. Gustav Oslov, come to the east side of the hall, a loud voice announced. The students of Echelon Academy recognized this voice. It belonged to Principal Irwin. His voice was louder than a mega speaker, which was why it reverberated across the entire hall. This was Principal Irwin's bloodline ability at work. He could amplify sound multiple times if he wanted to. TCH, what does he want? Gustav was irritated by being called out like that and being referred to as Oslov. The students from other schools were already wondering who this Gustav was for him to be called out like that. They had no idea what he was being called for, but they felt he had to be a big shot. Only the students of Echelon Academy were shocked and confused at Principal Irwin's call. They wondered why Principal Irwin would want to meet with the well-renowned trash of their class. A girl with long black hair had an uncomfortable look after hearing Gustav's name. She seemed to be moving with a group of friends earlier, but paused in her tracks upon hearing his name. What are you doing, Yahiko? Let's go. One of the girls around her brought her out of her thoughts by calling out to her. So RRY, let's go. She muttered in a low tone and proceeded to keep moving with her friends. Gustav had to turn around and start heading back into the hall after hearing the call. He was practically moving against the current since everyone was heading out, but surprisingly no one made contact with him till he got to his destination. He arrived at the east side of the hall and noticed Principal Irwin and Vice Principal Mark waiting by the side. The principal seemed to have a look of relief when he saw Gustav walking towards them. Gustav arrived in front of them and stared at Principal Irwin with an aloof look. What did you call for me, Principal Irwin? Gustav asked in a cool tone. Good thing you're here, Gustav, Principal Irwin started by saying. As you must have heard, There will be an exchange of knowledge the day after tomorrow. That is what they called it, but I'm sure someone as smart as you must have figured that it's just another competition, Principal Irwin added. Chapter 89. What exactly are you getting at, Principal Irwin? Please go straight to the point, Gustav demanded with an irritated expression. Principal Irwin gave a wry smile and continued speaking. We hardly have any good student who can represent us, so we're hoping you can take our beloved school into account and be the main student who represents Echelon Academy for the exchange of knowledge. Gustav stared at the principal, then at the vice principal before staring at the principal again. Why should I represent the school? Am I useless trash after all? Gustav asked with a look of confusion. You're not trash, Gustav. We all know that none of the other students are academically as bright as you are. Please don't let our school name be dragged into the mud during the knowledge exchange. We need to maintain our prestige. The other schools will not let us hear the end of it if our school comes last. They will not hesitate to poke fun at us. So please, we implore you to represent the school, Principal Irwin proposed once again after a lengthy explanation. Gustav stared at him for several seconds with a poker face, causing the atmosphere to be awkward. No. I'm trash. Gustav turned him down and turned around to leave. This trash will mess up your glorious school even more, so you should pick one of those students who are not considered trash. Gustav started walking away after saying that. Wait, Principal Irwin called out to him. Gustav paused his steps and turned his head around to stare at him. What can I do to make you represent the school? Is there something you want? Principal Irwin asked. Gustav smirked internally. So many things. Sadly, my hands are tied here. He recalled something while speaking internally. I'm not interested, he replied and turned around to leave. The principal wanted to call out to him again, but Gustav had already disappeared into the distance after walking at a very quick pace. The vice principal had a look of displeasure on his face. Can't we just force him? Vice Principal Mark proposed. I'm afraid we can't even lay a finger on him, Principal Irwin said with a defeated expression. What do we do now, Principal Irwin? Vice Principal Mark asked. We have no choice but to pick from the long list of mixed bloods that came with us. Let's pick those who don't have very bad grades in other subjects, Principal Irwin sighed after he finished speaking. Gustav had left the hall at this moment and was heading back to his room. He snickered internally as he remembered what happened a while ago. All of a sudden, I'm no longer trash now that y'all need me. Hypocrites. Gustav had the urge to laugh till he was rolling on the ground. Fools, I would have made y'all spend some money if not for my bet with Miss Amy, Gustav said internally with a big grin plastered across his face. Gustav? An excited feminine voice called out to him from the side of the corridor. Gustav turned to look at the person who had called him. He sighted a gorgeous female leaning on the glass walls at the right side. She had silver and pink shoulder-length hair with two small horns protruding out of her forehead. She was clad in a black sports outfit, making her figure look extremely athletic and attractive. Fancy meeting you here, Gustav smirked as he walked towards her. Angie, Gustav, both of them voiced out at the same time as they approached each other. Angie's face glowed up. I knew it was going to be you when I heard that name, she voiced out with a look of excitement. Oh, I see. For someone who's meeting a student from an opposing school, you seem rather excited, Gustav said. Well. Angie's face turned a shade of red as she joined her palms together. Is there any reason why you waited for me here? Gustav asked. Is there supposed to be a reason? Angie asked with a confused but cute expression. Of course. Or you're already used to the habit of waiting in front of my door, and you just decided to use this place as a door also to block my movement, Gustav said with a contemplative look. Now you make me sound like a stalker, Angie said while looking down. Yes, you are a stalker, Gustav answered bluntly. Angie's face looked more down upon hearing that. Haha, I'm just messing with you. Gustav laughed lightly and proceeded to walk forward. Gustav, you meanie, Angie voiced out while pouting and stomping her feet on the floor. You coming? Gustav said while turning around to stare at her. Where are we going? She asked while walking towards Gustav in front. Sightseeing. It's cool if you don't want to come. It want you any good to be seen with trash. Gustav turned around to keep walking. Trash? What's that? I don't care about that. Who said I don't want to come? I'm coming with you, She increased her pace and caught up with Gustav. Gustav just smirked and kept walking. All right, then let's go. Gustav arrived back in his room after at night around 8 p.m. He had spent more than 6 hours with Angie. They walked around the hotel visiting different places floor by floor. Where they spent a lot of time was in an arcade park where games were played. Gustav was surprised to see so many fun games and gadgets. He especially liked the virtual reality games a lot where he only had to use his mind to play. There were quite a lot of them, but the one he liked the most was one where he was piloting a spacecraft. He had always wanted to go to space, so the feeling of being completely immersed in the game, which was like going to space for real, was second to none for him. He learned how to play, and even competed with some people there. Most of them kept asking if he was actually a beginner, like he said he was due to the way he learned fast. I guess it's not as boring as I expected it to be. Hopefully, tomorrow's tour brings some fun like this too, Gustav muttered while lying on his bed. When he arrived a few moments ago, the room became silent. His roommates didn't have the guts to converse normally in his presence. Gustav wasn't bothered by this. In fact, he was hoping it continued this way for the next 3 days. The silence wasn't a bad thing to him. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.